Chapter 1200. Baiming, the capital of Great Tang. A report of victory from the Dongtao region arrived in the imperial palace and was delivered to Emperor Zhu Qiyu. The autumn rations had just arrived, and the Ministry of Revenue was in the process of collecting them. The imperial court had also raised the price, and Zhu Qiyu had intentionally spread the word that if anyone dared to oppose the imperial court, they would be prepared to settle the score after autumn. Just when Zhu Qiyu was breathing a sigh of relief and thinking that it wouldn't be long before he could send his army to the plains and display the glory of Baiming, the report of victory made his already good mood even better. Su Yozhen, who had long since received Yang Qindong's orders, had also walked into the imperial court. In truth, it wasn't just Su Yozhen. Some of the officials who had been bribed by Guang's silver had also submitted memorials. The general idea was that Guang was a pillar of the country and that the imperial court had to put him in an important position and promote him. Good, good, good. A general who can fight should be promoted. Who says that our Baiming doesn't have a general? Look at the report from our beloved Minister Guang. In order to capture Chaotic Well City, he fought a bloody battle for 7 days and killed more than 30,000 enemies in the end, returning Chaotic Well City to the embrace of our Baiming. Good, good, good. Come, write an imperial edict and make Guang the commander-in-chief of the Xianxia army. He will be in charge of all military affairs in Xianxia. Su Yozhen didn't even need to use much effort for Guang to be promoted. Not long after, memorials thanking him for his favor were delivered. At the same time, memorials for the promotion of Su Dei and a few other generals were also delivered. Su Yozhen had long since helped to establish relations with the Bureau of Military Personnel, so Su Dei had become the deputy commander-in-chief of the Xianxia army. With Guang's complete trust and importance, he held a large number of troops in his hands. By the time Yang Qindong learned of this news through the telegram, he had already led his army through the Basiquo Mountains and was 50 li away from the important city of Baiming 8 li. Very good. Yang Qindong was naturally very satisfied when he saw that Su Dei was promoted to the position of deputy commander-in-chief, and also became the youngest deputy commander-in-chief in the Baiming army. However, he put it aside after looking at it. Right now, the most important thing was how to face the opponent and enemy in front of him. After returning the telegram to Beta Persei, Yang Qindong stood in front of the sand table and asked, "Where is Master Lu?" "Young master, your master and the others are still 200 miles away from us. They should be able to reach us in a few days. They won't delay our mission," Beta Persei reported. Yang Qindong lightly nodded his head and said, "The messenger sent to Turpan has set off." "He did. I sent Ba Daojiang over. That kid wants to put on a good show." Yang Heir snickered. "Ba Daojiang?" Hearing that the captain of the Black Cavalry was the messenger, Yang Qindong couldn't help but smile and said, "Who came up with this idea?" However, Ba Daojiang is brave and resourceful. Most importantly, he has a strong military aura. He is really a good choice. Who said that diplomats must be eloquent? At the very least, it depends on the person. Take Yang Qindong for example. He believed that he should send out an envoy based on the type of enemy he was dealing with. Since he was going to use troops against Turpan, the envoy he sent out couldn't be too weak. Ba Daojiang was a member of the Black Knight's Dragon Guards and had followed Yang Qindong for many years. When he spoke with others, he would occasionally display the powerful aura of a soldier. Naturally, he was a suitable candidate. Seeing that Yang Qindong was still very satisfied, Beta Persei also smiled, but then he still asked worriedly, "Young master, do you think they will make things difficult for Ba Daojiang?" "They won't dare," Xian said in a very confident tone. "Not to mention that the messenger is not killed in a war, just the fact that the 5-star army is coming in strong means that the king of Turpan will not make things difficult for the messenger sent by the 5-star army unless there is water in his brain and he doesn't want to have a good ending." The 6th young master is so confident that Beta Persei also breathed a sigh of relief. Beta Persei has a lot of feelings for these Black Cavalry who follow the young master every day, so he naturally doesn't want anything to happen to any of them. Things are as Yang Qindong expected. At this moment, Ba Daojiang is not in any danger. On the contrary, when facing the king of Turpan, Ba Daojiang's tone and attitude are neither servile nor overbearing. After following Yang Chendong for so long, Ba Daojiang's courage is not something that ordinary people can compare to. This time, he took the initiative to ask Beta Persei for this mission because he wants to make a greater contribution. He has already received news that as Yang Xie's forces grow stronger, his territory grows, and his population grows. Bugnam of Gojoseon's safety becomes the most important. The number of black cavalry members was going to increase accordingly. It is said that the original 1,000 Longwei will be expanded to 2,000, and Xiu Vi and Dao Shao will be the two captains. Because the number of people will double, and 2 vice-captains will be elected, he is aiming for this position. This news is not groundless. Resin City has already built the new black cavalry's battle armor and the soldiers' battle armor. It is said that many capable people have already signed up, and the new members are also in the process of being selected. With such a good thing, Ba Daojiang also wants to improve from a small captain, so he saw the identity of the messenger and coaxed Beta Persei for this mission. In order to do this to the best of his abilities, Ba Daojiang had put in a lot of effort. He had a clear understanding of the situation of the various factions in this region. This time, when he met King Shiza, he laid out the facts and reasoned with him. The gist of it was that the Turpan Empire was facing a huge crisis, and as the front line of the various factions, surrendering to the 5-star army was the best choice. King Shiza is old, already 60 years old, and can be considered to be in the ranks of the oldest. However, the more a person is like this, the more afraid of death he is, especially when he is used to living a life of luxury. He does not want to take any risks. Previously, when Ili, Yi Erqiang, and Turpan held a meeting, he felt that something is wrong. If he really wants to fall out with the 5-star army, then Turpan, who is located in the easternmost area, will be the first to bear the brunt. This makes him very comfortable. Unfortunately, the other 2 sides have expressed their agreement. His eldest son, Hardenbarter, who is also the eldest prince who represented him in the meeting of the 3 sides, expressed his position without asking him. In order to protect his dignity, he wants to fight the 5-star army to the end. Because of this, when Hardenbarter came back, Shiza put him under house arrest. At this time, Ba Daojiang, who represented the 5-star army, appeared as a messenger. As soon as he appeared, he helped him analyze the situation. In the end, he said that if Turpan does not surrender, then it will be a dead end. At that time, as the king, Shiza will be buried here. And the Turpan people who died because of the war will blame him for generations to come. Respected King Shiza, everywhere my 5-star army goes, there is no place that we do not win. Do you think that a small Turpan can stop us? If you insist on using your weapons, then the only outcome that awaits you will be death. On the contrary, if you are willing to surrender, then not only will your people not suffer, as the king, you will be sent to a place with beautiful scenery and pleasant weather to live out the rest of your life. In fact, there are already many kings and leaders of other countries there. They are all living very well. You will not be lonely there, you will definitely quickly fall in love with it. At that time, there won't be too few people serving you, and your treatment won't be too low. Apart from losing a bit of power and freedom, everything else will be the same as it is now. You won't have to live in fear like you do now. How wonderful would that be? Ba Daojiang was originally a person of the pugilistic world. He was used to speaking human words. Often, the dead could be revived by his words. Not to mention, he had learned a lot from Yang Chendong over the years. His words were more reasonable and persuasive. The scene described by Ba Daojiang did not move Shiza, but there was one sentence that touched his heart. The 5-star army was indeed very powerful. Facing such a powerful enemy, the possibility of Turpan being defeated was very high. If that was the case, as the king, he would be dead without a doubt. This was not something he wanted to see. Naturally, he wanted to surrender. Although it was a little embarrassing, at least he would be able to live. Furthermore, he would not have to worry for the rest of his life. Wasn't that a good thing? Esteemed envoy's suggestion is not bad. This king also does not want to become enemies with the 5-star army. However, the situation in my country is a little different. The eldest prince and some of the important generals in the army do not seem to agree and insist on fighting with the 5-star army. Xianxia said with a slightly ugly expression. As he grew older, the eldest prince had slowly matured. He also had the ability to counterattack and the right to speak. In particular, the eldest prince and a few of the important generals in the army were like-minded. This made Xianxia quite wary. This was also why, even though the eldest prince had violated the decree, Xianxia could only confine him at home. He could not even lock him up in prison. Ba Daojiang naturally did not know this. The relationship between some of the royal family was not something that outsiders could easily find out. After all, people who were born in such a family were used to acting from a young age. How many of them were sincere in what they said? It was extremely difficult to grasp the true thoughts of these people. Because he did not know, Ba Daojiang thought that Xianxia's words were an excuse. A look of disdain appeared in his eyes as he asked, "What? Does your majesty want to become enemies with the 5-star army? Even if that's the case, there is no need to find such an unreasonable excuse." The truth was actually treated as an excuse by Ba Daojiang. Xianxia did not know how to explain himself. Thinking that he could not become enemies with the 5-star army, he hardened his heart and said, "Forget it. This king will express his attitude here. I do not want to become enemies with the 5-star army. Therefore, I choose to surrender." Chapter 12:01. The word surrender came out of King Xiaxia's mouth with some difficulty. After all, he was the king of a country. How important was his face and dignity? But he really couldn't see any hope of victory, so he decided to surrender in the end. In his opinion, as long as he surrendered to the 5-star army, after their army entered, even if the crown prince had any thoughts or dissatisfaction, he wouldn't be able to change the facts. This way, the whole of Turpan would be spared from the flames of war. Ba Daojiang still wanted to persuade and even threaten Xianxia, but he didn't expect Xianxia to surrender so quickly. He couldn't help but be overjoyed. I knew that His Majesty is a smart person. Sure enough, it's true. After reaching a consensus, the conversation between the two sides became much more pleasant. After the final discussion, it was decided that the 5-star army would enter 8 Mile City in 5 days. At that time, King Xianxia would give an order for them to fully cooperate with the 5-star army. Then, when the 5-star army arrived at Turpan City, as the king, he would personally go out to welcome them to express his respect for King Wunan of Daimyong. Ba Daojiang left with a happy face. The mission was completed, and it went so smoothly that it made him extremely happy. Originally, it would take more than 2 days to travel on a fast horse, but it took him less than 2 days to take a shortcut back to the 5-star army's camp in front of 8 Mile City. Then, he happily told the news to Yang Qindong. After knowing that Ba Daojiang had returned to the camp and really completed the mission of persuading the king of Turpan to surrender, Yang Qindong also smiled. Not bad, I didn't expect Ba Daojiang to have such ability. Not bad. Young master, this should be due to the fame of our 5-star army. Beta Persei also laughed. As the person in charge of the Black Cavalry, of course, he had to be modest. Yang Qindong laughed after hearing this. He pointed at Beta Persei and said, "I didn't expect you to be modest." "All right, with this reward, Bao Jiang will be rewarded handsomely." "Yes, thank you, young master." Beta Persei quickly saluted and laughed. Things went unexpectedly smoothly. The 5-star army began to prepare to enter the city. Since the king of a country had made a promise and even wrote an imperial edict to Badaojiang, no one doubted it. After all, if there was a mistake, Xianxia, as the king, would be labeled as a lowly person. This was a very shameful thing for the king of a country. Even if he won the war, no one would trust him. But what if Xianxia was no longer the king? Then wouldn't this imperial edict be nullified as well? Turpan's capital, Turpan City, the first prince's residence. 2 tall and strong men were discussing something with a young man in the secret chamber of the prince's mansion. The young man had an extraordinary temperament, especially when he raised his hands and stamped his feet. He always gave people a very noble feeling. He was the first prince of Turpan, Harden Barter. It must be said that Harden Barter was a very capable person. In history, the rise of Turpan began from his generation. Later, after the famous Prime Minister Arap died because of old age, Harden Barter, who inherited the throne, took the opportunity to rise. In the end, his grandson unified the entire Yilianli region, turning the three forces into one. This was also the predecessor of the modern Xinjiang. Of course, such a person in history would not be willing to submit to the five-star army. As a prince, and the future leader of Turpan, Harden Barter advocated to go to war with the five-star army during the Three Kingdoms Conference, which caused his father to be angry. Harden Barter translated it into Chinese. The general idea was that he was resolute and heroic. How could such a person be willing to be grounded at home? Just like now, on the surface, he was not allowed to go out, but the two most important generals in the army took the initiative to come to his door. The two men sitting opposite him were the important generals in charge of Turpan. They were called Shurigan, meaning storm, and Dai Qin, meaning war general. The reason why the two of them braved the taboo to appear in the first prince's mansion was because of one thing. Their spies in the palace had sent news that King Shiza secretly met with the messenger of the five-star army and reached an agreement to surrender. Since ancient times, whenever a country encountered a crisis, it was usually the generals that stood up. For them, dying on the battlefield seemed to be a kind of mission. Even if they died on the battlefield, it was also a great honor. The two generals were both ambitious people and had contributed to the rise of Turpan in history. How could such a person be willing to become a surrendered general without doing anything? However, they were only generals. Although they controlled a portion of the army, they could not refute the king's words. After thinking for a while, they came to the first prince's mansion. In their opinion, the first prince would definitely be the same as them. He would not surrender to the five-star army so easily. Harden Barter attached great importance to the arrival of these two important generals. He also learned about his father's decision from his spies in the palace. He was greatly disappointed, but at the same time, he was also thinking of countermeasures. The arrival of these two generals gave him new hope and the determination to go all out. In the secret room, the three of them sat cross-legged. Without any moving opening words, Harden Barter expressed his will. Generals, although Turpan is not as powerful as the five-star army, it is impossible for us to surrender without doing anything. I also know that the two of you are courageous people, and I also know why you are here. However, it seems that it is impossible to persuade my father. He even wrote the surrender edict. It is impossible for him to go back on his words. The only solution is... Harden Barter didn't finish his words immediately. After all, this kind of action was shameful in the eyes of many people and would be condemned by the officials of the country. The two generals of the rising sun gone didn't think too much. When they heard that there was a solution, their eyes lit up. They looked at Harden Barter expectantly and said, "First Prince, what solution do you have? Please tell us." "Yes, what do you need us to do?" "We will do our best." The other general, Dai Qin, also said. Harden Barter was waiting for these words. He didn't feel troubled and said, "If we want to solve this, we just need to make my father give up the throne. That way, his edict won't be recognized by our Turpan kingdom. Of course, we can't hurt father. After all, he has done a lot for Turpan. He is also my father, so after he abdicates, I will find a quiet place for him to retire and spend the rest of his life in peace." Hiss. This was clearly an attempt to seize power for himself. The two generals couldn't help but suck in a breath of cold air after witnessing such a momentous event. Even though they were unhappy with King Shiza's actions, he was still their king. If he rebelled, they wouldn't be able to bear the responsibility either. The two generals didn't speak. Harden Barter's heart skipped a beat. He knew that once he said something, he had to do it. Otherwise, once the news was leaked, he would be the one to die. His father didn't only have him as a prince. If his father knew that he wanted to rebel, he wouldn't have a good ending. In other words, after he voiced his thoughts, he had no way out. Right now, he had to get the support of the two generals. Otherwise, what awaited him would be worse than death. The two of you are the backbone of my Turpan kingdom. All these years, the reason why the kingdom has been able to stabilize and the people have been able to live in peace is completely inseparable from your efforts. But now, someone is about to destroy this achievement. Are you going to just let it happen? Do you really want the people of Turpan to be slaves? To be looked down upon forever? After a series of questions, Shurigan and Daiqin couldn't help but frown. Seeing that his words were effective, Hardenbarter suddenly stood up, then bowed to the two of them. Your Highness the First Prince, what do you mean by this? The two generals who couldn't accept such a grand gesture hurriedly stood up. No matter how much they had contributed to Turpan, Hardenbarter was still the first prince. The relationship between master and servant couldn't be messed up. I don't mean anything. This prince is just begging the two of you on behalf of the people of Turpan. In this moment of life and death, please help us. The people here will remember your heroic deeds for generations to come. Thank you. While speaking, Hardenbarter once again lowered his head. At this moment, the two generals were clearly moved. Their faces became very hesitant. Sensing the change in the two, Hardenbarter opened his mouth again and said, Generals, we just don't want to see the people of Turpan being humiliated. Besides, we don't want to do anything to father. We can't endanger his life. We just want him to retire in advance. The political power of Turpan is still in the hands of our royal family. What you are doing is not a rebellion, but a meritorious deed. Hardenbarter knew that the other party was hesitating. Perhaps they were just a step away. At this moment, Hardenbarter forcefully pushed them again. The two still didn't move. Hardenbarter was a bit anxious. After thinking about it, he had to make up his mind and say, Generals, I don't know if you have thought about it. If you surrender the 5-star army, what will happen to you? As for your family and children, I'm afraid that their lives might be threatened at any time. As men, can you bear to see such a thing happen? When that time comes, regret will be useless. You won't be qualified husbands, qualified fathers. The humiliation will accompany you for the rest of your lives. How will you have the face to see them? Chapter 1202. Hardenbarter decided to be ruthless and started to attack his family. It had to be said that this move was very effective, especially since the two generals were loyal people. They were naturally very good to their families. If they really surrendered to the 5-star army, then anything could happen. As men, they couldn't even guarantee the safety of their family. This was something they couldn't accept. If such a thing really happened, it would be a fate worse than death for them. No. Don't say any more. Shurigan couldn't take it anymore and shouted. I'll follow the first prince, but no matter what, please remember that you can't hurt the old king. Definitely not. Yes, we can't hurt the old king. We are where we are today because of the old king. We can't let him down anymore. General Daiqin also couldn't help but say. Seeing that the two generals finally agreed, Hardenbarter breathed a sigh of relief. A smile appeared on his face as he said, All right, the two generals can rest assured. I assure you that I won't let anyone threaten my father's safety. Next, can you send troops into the palace? You know that the commander's seal is in my father's hands. I can't move a single soldier. That's not a problem. I can move 200 soldiers. Since they were going to submit to the first prince, they naturally had to show their strength. Shurigan expressed his attitude. I can also move 200 soldiers. Also, I can move more than half of the palace's guards in the name of patrolling. This way, our next move will be much smoother. Daiqin said in the same tone. Okay. With the two of you, we can succeed. However, there is one more thing. Imperial Father promised the envoy from the 5-star army that he would open the city gates to welcome them in 5 days. If that's the case, once they are allowed to enter, I'm afraid that it would be impossible for us to stop them. Tomorrow is the date of the 5-day agreement. Can the two generals see if anyone can go there in advance? This was what Hardened Barter was truly concerned about. Once the main gate was occupied, the Turpan kingdom would enter a passive state in the following battles. Knowing that this was a serious matter, the two generals looked at each other. In the end, Shurigan stepped forward and said, "If that's the case, I'll bring some men over. The general guarding the city is my subordinate. He should listen to me." Seeing that the rising sun Gon had taken the initiative to take on this important mission, Hardened Barter was naturally overjoyed. "All right, then I'll leave everything to you, General. Your 200 soldiers can also go with you. After all, it's most important to not lose control of the situation." "No need. 8 Mile City has 20,000 soldiers. I won't be able to take it down even if I don't bring 200 soldiers with me. This time, I'm convincing you with reason. I know what I'm doing." Shurigan shook his head. He knew that forcing King Shiza to step down was the most important thing. Otherwise, even if he took control of 8 Mile City, he would be labeled as a traitor. Then he would have no way out. The matter was decided just like that. After Shurigan left the first prince's residence, he quickly rode his horse and only brought 2 soldiers to 8 Mile City. His time was limited. After all, he had to get there before dawn. Otherwise, some things would be unstoppable. The first prince and General Dai Qin stayed behind. After some discussion, they decided to take down the palace at 3 in the morning. That was when people entered a deep sleep. It was also when people's guard was at its lowest. Whether it was King Shiza of Turpan or the spies that Yang Xia arranged in Turpan, none of them knew about this. No one believed that a rebellion was about to happen. No one doubted that someone actually dared to do this. To outsiders, both Shurigan and Dai Qin were personally promoted by King Shiza. How could a dog bite its master? At night, the weather at the end of September was already a bit cold. The palace guards who were in charge of patrolling the palace had already entered a half-asleep state. After Dai Qin used the reason of patrolling to take away half of the palace guards, the entire palace's defense level dropped to the lowest. There were less than 500 people and most of them were in a muddle-headed state. Especially when it was about to be daybreak, a person's guard was really low. It was also at this moment that black figures flipped over the walls and entered. Like venomous snakes, they moved towards the inner courtyard of the palace without any signs of life. They made their way in layer by layer, getting closer and closer to King Shiza's chambers. "Who is it?" As the large group of black-clothed soldiers entered, their movements finally attracted the attention of the palace guards. Following this shout, an arrow pierced through the air and hit the chest of the person who shouted. The arrow pierced through the heart and died. This arrow was like the order to attack. Countless black shadows shouted and charged forward. They charged towards the palace guards who were completely unprepared and didn't expect this at all. The chaos started. Due to the lack of preparation and the fact that their forces were evenly matched, they quickly broke through one line of defense after another and got closer and closer to the king's palace. Such a large commotion had already woken up King Shiza, who was sleeping. When he heard from the guards that a group of people had surrounded the palace and were getting closer and closer to him, Shiza was so scared that he hid under a dragon table. His whole body trembled as he kept repeating the same sentence, "Don't kill me, don't kill me." When the sky was bright, 300 of the palace guards were killed, 100 injured, and close to 100 captured. King Shiza, who had fainted from fear, was carried away and placed in a secret place. Under the accompaniment of General Dai Qin, Prince Hardened Barter sat on the throne as he wished. He also received the tiger token and country seal to command the army, confirming the fact that he was the new king of Turpan. Don't lose 8 Mile City. When the sky brightened, the East City Gate near the 5-star Army's camp was all opened, showing that they were determined to surrender according to the agreement. Advance. Yang Chendong stood in front of the main camp and waved his arm with a smile. Immediately, the 5,000 Mongol cavalry of the Wufeng army raised the 5-star flag and charged towards Don't Lose 8 Mile City. Each and every one of the cavalry was filled with vigor. On the city wall, Shurigan, who had already put on a set of general armor, squinted his eyes as he looked at the scene in front of him. He had arrived before dawn, and after some persuasion, the general of the city guard had returned to his side. Of course, part of the reason was because of Shurigan's persuasion. Of course, it was also because the defending soldiers didn't want to surrender before even shooting an arrow. As a soldier, as long as one had courage, unless it was necessary, no one would be willing to surrender. Get ready. Seeing that the vanguard of the 5-star army had arrived at the city gate and were about to enter, Shurigan shouted, "Fire!" So. The Turpan soldiers who were hiding under the battlements jumped out like fishes. They were like heavenly soldiers descending from the heavens. All of them took out their bows and shot at the defenseless 5-star army cavalry. Since they were defenseless and didn't expect something like this to happen, hundreds of them were hit by arrows. Some of them were killed on the spot while others were injured. They cried out in pain on their horses. Close the city gate. After succeeding in his attack, Shurigan immediately gave the order to close the city gate. He noticed that the 5-star army had more than 100,000 soldiers. Even if he had the upper hand, if he wasn't careful, he wouldn't be able to defend the city. The sudden change at the city gate caught the 5-star army off guard. The Mongol cavalry general, Narisong, who was following the troops to enter the city, ordered the cavalry to retreat. His eyes were red as he rushed back to the tent and knelt in front of Yang Qindong. "My king," the Turfan army went back on their words. "Please allow me to lead the troops to siege the city to collect the blood debt." At that moment, not only Narisong, but all the other generals had bloodshot eyes. They were furious. Yang Qindong, who was wearing a golden cape, didn't look any better. He didn't expect the Turpan army to do such a thing and lie to him. Although the Mongol cavalry wasn't his own, since they were able to join him, he was confident that he could turn them into his own. After all, they were his soldiers. Of course, he was furious that such a thing happened. Report. Just as all the generals were furious and were waiting for the order to attack the city, Wang Shan suddenly appeared. He held a telegram from the Turpan Security Bureau and handed it to Yang Qindong. After taking it and glancing through it, Yang Qindong sucked in a cold breath. At the same time, the anger in his heart subsided. He looked at the generals and said, "Let's retreat. Let's go back to the tent for a discussion." Yang Qindong turned around and walked into the tent. At that moment, Badao Jiang, who was wearing the black cavalry uniform, was kneeling on the ground. Kneeling with him were Qiu Vi, Dao Shao, Peng Yu, and a few other captains. It was obvious that they had seen how the Turpan army went back on their words and even used the chance to injure the Mongol cavalry. Thinking back to how confident he was when he had completed the mission, Badao Jiang was here to ask for forgiveness. The rest of the people were tied up so that the 6th young master could deal with them leniently. "Get up. This isn't your fault. Badao Jiang, you've completed your mission well." Yang Qindong walked in front of the crowd and stopped. After he finished speaking, he walked into the big tent. If it was before he saw the telegram, Yang Qindong might have been furious. However, now that he knew what had happened, he wouldn't make things difficult for Badao Jiang. Speaking of which, he didn't expect such a thing to happen. Chapter 1203. That's right, it was recorded in the telegram that Prince Harden Barter had suddenly declared himself king and replaced King Shiza. He had also announced to all of his subjects and commoners that from today onwards, Turpan would declare war on the 5-star army. When this sudden news came out, the intelligence department immediately started to investigate the reason. They didn't want to send a telegram to Wu Nanking without any head or tail. Because of this, they were a little late, which caused the loss of the Mongolian cavalry. However, Yang Qindong could not blame them. After all, the news needed to be confirmed and they needed to find out the reason. It was normal for them to report it in the evening. Moreover, he did not expect such a thing to happen in Turpan either. After returning to the tent, he looked at the contents of the telegram. Harden Barter had actually used force to open the gates of the royal palace and seized power. At the same time, he was shocked and blamed himself. How could a kingdom surrender so easily without even firing an arrow? He had actually believed it. Looks like I was too careless. Things went too smoothly and I became too arrogant. I have to pay attention to this in the future. While Yang Chendong was reflecting on his actions, the other generals had also entered the tent. After everyone stood still, they looked at Yang Chendong expectantly, waiting for him to give the order to attack. Yang Chendong suddenly stood up and bowed 90 degrees to everyone as he said sincerely, "Everyone, this time this king was wrong. I'm sorry." This sudden apology scared the generals so much that they were dumbfounded. Following this, they all knelt on the ground and cried out, "Your Majesty, please take back your apology. We can't accept it, we can't accept it." It was no wonder that these generals, who killed people without blinking and would not even tremble in the face of an enemy's army, were afraid. In ancient times, how could an emperor apologize to his subjects? This was the special nature of feudal hierarchy. Even if the emperor had made a mistake, it was already a great thing to be able to issue an edict of self-reproach. Who knew how long he would be praised for this? Not to mention, Yang Chendong had bowed and apologized. His sincerity was even more evident. Even Beta Persei, who was standing on the side, was shocked for a moment and also knelt on the ground. Yang Chendong was now their king, their master. Where was the logic of a master apologizing to a servant? This was unheard of. Among the generals, Narisong knelt on the ground with tears in his eyes. He was indeed angry just now. Of course, he was not angry at Yang Chendong, nor did he dare to be angry at Yang Chendong. He was angry because Turpan went back on their words. He only wanted one thing, to attack the city and avenge their brothers who had died. Narisong Chendong. At this moment, Narisong Chendong zes his heart. With such a king, even if Narisong Chendong died in the charge, he could close his eyes in happiness. Yang Chendong sincerely apologized. In the modern army, if the commander of an army did something wrong, he would also have to write a reflection. If the matter was serious, he would also have to publicly apologize. This was something that Narisong Chendong was used to. He never thought that this move would cause such a big reaction from everyone. Yang Chendong sighed. After lamenting the different environments and different concepts under different systems, he had no choice but to sit back down on the chair. Then, he raised his right hand. "All right, everyone, get up." When the generals heard this, they quietly raised their heads. When they saw that Yang Chendong had returned to his chair, they all let out a long sigh and got up from the ground. But at this moment, everyone lowered their heads. In their opinion, if the king admitted his mistake, could it be that they were not in the wrong? Why didn't anyone question the authenticity of Turpan's surrender before? Were they too careless and arrogant? As if reading everyone's thoughts, Yang Chendong handed the telegram to Beta Persei beside him. "Show it to the generals and they'll know what's going on." The telegram contained detailed information and the reason for the attack this time, which was better than Yang Chendong's explanation in 100 sentences. Sure enough, after the generals read it, they all showed a look of realization. Obviously, in their opinion, it was very difficult for a mutiny to happen. And now that it happened, they could only blame their bad luck. Now that everyone knows the reason, let's talk about your opinions. After the telegram was passed around and returned to Yang Chendong's hands, he looked at the generals and asked aloud. After knowing the cause and effect, the generals quickly made a decision in their hearts. Immediately, the 1st Cavalry Division's division commander Tian, who was the first to stand up. "Teacher, in my opinion, since their new king has declared war on us, then we don't have to be polite. We'll just send our troops to fight. Our 1st Division is willing to be the vanguard and take down as many as possible to avenge our dead comrades." Tian, who took the initiative to ask for battle, but in the eyes of the other generals, they were unwilling to comply. After Na Rizong reacted, he immediately stood up and said, "My king, the ones who were injured are our Mongolian cavalry. Please give this opportunity to take revenge to us. Sixth young master, please give the mission to our new army. I promise to take it down in 3 days at the latest." The new army's commander Su He stood up and said, "Give it to our Far Eastern Army's 1st Cavalry Division. We can take it down in 2.5 days. Division Commander Dai Kuo also stood up and said, "Give it to us." In an instant, all the generals and generals stood up and requested to be the vanguard. They wanted to take down 8 Mile and avenge their dead comrades. What was the morale of an army? This was the morale of an army. When everyone requested to be the vanguard, this kind of morale reached its peak. Once someone was allowed to be the vanguard, they would definitely give 100% of their effort and perform 120% of their best. At this time, if Yang Qindong gave the order, the siege would definitely be twice the result with half the effort. But, however, Yang Qindong still shook his head. Not for anything else, but he was very clear about one thing. This time, he brought all the cavalrymen. If he let the cavalrymen attack the city, not only would the effect be worse, the losses would also be greater. This was not what he wanted to see. However, he couldn't use the cavalrymen. 8 Mile City had to be taken down no matter what. Just based on the fact that the enemy suddenly attacked and killed nearly 1,000 of his cavalrymen, he had to take revenge. Otherwise, how could he face his generals and intimidate the enemy? "Beta Persei, when will the 4th Master Lu arrive?" Yang Qindong asked Beta Persei, who was beside him. Beta Persei was still thinking about which army the young master would send out when he suddenly heard this question. He was stunned for a moment, but he still instinctively replied, "The 4th Master Lu is transporting supplies at the back. They will only arrive at the camp tomorrow morning. Then we will wait for the 4th Master Lu to arrive. This time, I want to let them know what is the meaning of blood for blood. I want to let them know what kind of serious consequences they will face if they dare to set a trap for our 5-star army." Yang Qindong's voice was sonorous and powerful as he spoke. Under normal circumstances, Yang Qindong wouldn't do anything to ordinary people. Even if he didn't like this race very much, once they were conquered by him, they would become his people. There was no problem in protecting them a little. However, this time, Turpan's actions angered him. He decided to use artillery to attack the city tomorrow. When the time came, whether it was soldiers or civilians, they would all be baptized by artillery fire. This method was indeed somewhat heavenly, but these people weren't Han civilians. If they wanted to blame someone, they could only blame their new king, Harden Barter. Yang Qindong didn't agree to any of the general's requests. Instead, he wanted to wait for the 4th Master Lu to arrive before starting the battle. This made everyone somewhat dissatisfied, but at the same time, they couldn't say anything. After all, who could compete with the cold vanguard army in a siege battle? Of course, it wasn't that no one had any opinions about this. For example, the commander of the Far Eastern Army's 1st Cavalry Division, Dai Kuo, was somewhat puzzled. He had joined the Far Eastern Army when it was formed and had always been working under Chen Bo. Because of his exceptional strength and intelligence, he was promoted as an exception. This kind of person was somewhat arrogant. In addition, he didn't know much about the 5-star army, especially the Cold Vanguard Army, which was why he was dissatisfied. However, seeing that no one objected, he thought to himself, "All right, then let's see how this 4th Master Lu performs tomorrow. If they can't do it, I will definitely stand out and fight this battle well. This will also make the Far Eastern Army famous." Yang Qindong didn't know what Dai Kuo was thinking. Even if he knew, he wouldn't care too much. He had absolute confidence in the 4th Master Lu. Don't lose 8 Mile City. After a wave of arrows killed nearly 1,000 enemies, the 5-star army retreated. Shurigan's expression didn't relax. Instead, he became even more nervous. He ordered the soldiers to go up the city walls and prepare kerosene, pillows, and boulders. He was waiting for the 5-star army to attack the city. He only had 20,000 soldiers, so he didn't have much confidence. He only hoped that the new king, Harden Barter, would be able to bring his troops over as soon as possible. On the city walls, all of the Turpan soldiers were waiting. Many of them were so nervous that they were covered in cold sweat. However, in the 5-star army's camp 5 miles away, it was a relaxed scene. The cooks were cooking. Smoke curled up into the air, and the aroma of the meat filled the eyes of many soldiers with satisfaction. Just now, the higher-ups had sent down an order for everyone to rest for a day and prepare to attack tomorrow afternoon. At that time, it wouldn't be easy for everyone to eat in such a relaxed and defenseless place. This was the calm before the storm. Many of the soldiers took this time to rest and prepare themselves for the next battle in their best condition. The 5 astral army suddenly stopped attacking. This was out of Rising Sun Gon's expectations. Even when night fell, there was still no movement from the other side. Finally, he could not help but write a letter and send it back to Tulyafan's city to deliver to the new king. Chapter 1204. By the time he received the letter, it was already noon of the second day. It took 2 fast horses to deliver the letter. Harden Barter, who was wearing the king's robes, nervously opened the letter. What he was most worried about was the 5-star army attacking the city. Dai Qin, who was standing beside him, also felt the same way about Harden Barter's worries. When he saw that the letter was opened and the new king was stunned, he couldn't help but feel even more nervous. He carefully asked, "Your Majesty, did something go wrong?" Harden Barter didn't reply to General Dai Qin's question. He was still stunned. When he was asked a second time, he finally handed the letter over. "General, look at it yourself." Dai Qin took the letter with a trace of nervousness. After carefully reading it, he couldn't help but laugh. "Good news, good news. King, the 5-star army didn't dare to attack the city after suffering a loss. From this, we can see that they aren't as strong as the rumors say. As long as we can defend the city and wait for our reinforcements to arrive, we can definitely keep them out of the city. This way, our country will be safe. At that time, when the other countries come to help, it will be time for us to fight back with all our strength." Dai Qin's idea was indeed correct. Defend the city and not let the 5-star army attack. Then, gather the forces of Ili Li, Yi Erqiang, and Wara's cavalry. They will have hundreds of thousands of soldiers. At that time, their military strength will exceed the enemy's and their supply lines will be much closer. This way, their chances of victory will be much higher. After a bout of laughter, Dai Qin noticed that the new king was still frowning. Confused, he asked, "King, this is good news. Why aren't you unhappy?" "Well, I feel that something is wrong. How can the 5-star army, which is able to defeat the great Ming dynasty and even the cavalry of the grassland, who are the best at fighting, be so weak? Do they still have some kind of plan?" Harden Barter was indeed one of the kings who established Turpan's strength. He was able to see the problem on the spot. However, General Dai Qin didn't agree with his idea. "Your Majesty, don't worry. No matter what kind of strategy they have, as long as we don't let them attack and lose 8 li, then they won't be able to use any ability. At that time, the initiative will be in our hands. Won't we be able to do whatever we want? Of course, if your Majesty is worried, I am willing to immediately rush to your aid." Hearing that Dai Qin was willing to send reinforcements now, Harden Barter's face looked much better. "Okay, then I'll have to trouble you. But we only prepared 30,000 soldiers, is that enough?" "That's enough. 30,000 plus the 20,000 defending the city. That's a total of 50,000 soldiers. That's enough to last for 10 days to half a month, or even longer. At that time, the reinforcements from other countries will arrive as well. There won't be a problem," Dai Qin said confidently. These words gave Harden Barter a lot of confidence. He nodded happily and said, "All right, then this king will give you the tiger seal. General, don't worry, this king will immediately urge the other countries to send reinforcements. Your Majesty, I will go and prepare now. We will be able to lead the troops out in the afternoon," Dai Qin said excitedly. However, he didn't know what kind of opponent he was about to face. What he didn't know even more was that right now, 8 Li was about to face hell on earth. Yesterday, Yang Chendong gave the order that when the 4th Division arrived, they would immediately attack. When the order was given out, Ling Daqiang, who was escorting the supplies at the back, felt like grass had grown in his heart. He couldn't wait to get to 8 Li's city walls. Come, call the regimental commanders for a meeting. Ling Daqiang, who couldn't suppress the excitement in his heart, finally couldn't hold it in anymore and called for the 4 regimental commanders. Very quickly, the 1st Regiment Commander Gao Xiang, the 2nd Regiment Commander He Wen, the 3rd Regiment Commander Lu Zheng, and the 4th Regiment Commander Yi Xingfeng hurriedly arrived in front of Ling Daqiang. Then, the 4 of them looked at the commander with inquiring eyes. They didn't understand why he called for everyone to gather when they would be able to reach 8 Li's city walls tomorrow. Ling Daqiang didn't immediately speak. Instead, he looked at the 4 regimental commanders. Seeing that they didn't know what was going on, he couldn't help but laugh. All right, there's no need to guess anymore. I'll tell you now. This is a good thing. As he spoke, Ling Daqiang took out the telegram he just received. The 4 regimental commanders quickly passed it around and read it clearly. Then, the eyes of the 4 regimental commanders all lit up. The 1st Regiment Commander Gao Xiang said without hesitation, "Our 1st Regiment is the main force. This time, it will definitely be our 1st Regiment's turn to shine. Hey, you can't be like this. Every good thing goes to the 1st Regiment first. Our 2nd Regiment isn't satisfied." The 2nd Regiment Commander He Wen immediately expressed his opposition. Then, the other 2 regimental commanders also expressed their opposition. In the end, the task still fell to Ling Daqiang. Commander Ling Daqiang was very clear that this was an extremely important matter. Everyone wanted to get this mission. It was just that he, as a commander, was in a difficult position as to who to send. In the end, he actually rolled his eyes and used the most primitive method to solve the problem, which was to draw lots. He prepared 4 slips of paper for everyone to draw. 3 of them didn't have anything written on them. Only the last one had the word "attack" written on it. Whoever got the mission would get it. This method was unanimously approved by the 4 regimental commanders. It was fairer to compete with luck. No one could say anything about it. Just like that, after the 4 regimental commanders competed with their luck, the 2nd Regiment Commander He Wen got the slip with the word "attack" written on it. Ha, our 2nd Regiment will be the attack. After opening the slip in his hand, He Wen shouted with joy. The other 3 regimental commanders had dejected expressions. They looked at He Wen with eyes full of envy. All right, the mission will be given to the 2nd Regiment. But Regiment Commander please remember that your regiment will be escorting 5 100mm mortars at the front of the group. Whether or not you can reach the main camp by noon tomorrow will depend on your ability. If you can't reach on time, the other regimental commanders will be drawing lots. You won't have anything to do. Also, if you don't complete the mission well this time and the landing point is not accurate, the 2nd Regiment won't have anything to do with this kind of mission in the future. Are you willing to accept? Ling Daqiang continued to raise a series of requests to increase the difficulty of the mission. Yes, I'll accept all of them. Ha. The 2nd Regiment Commander He Wen said confidently. Speaking of which, as a member of the Cold Vanguard, it was normal for them to practice with cannons. Although they couldn't practice it as often as they practiced with guns, they would still have missions to fire from time to time. Once they had a target, they would definitely not miss. Just like that, the other 3 regimental commanders sent He Wen off with envious gazes. The 5 100mm mortars that accompanied the army also left with the 2nd Regiment. In order to complete the mission and complete it efficiently, He Wen rushed all the way. Before noon the next day, he had already arrived 9 miles in the morning. He even took the time to let the soldiers rest for 2 hours and eat some food. Then, he placed the 5 mortars 300 meters in front of 8 Mile City. Yang Chendong had already sent someone to set the measuring stick. Now that the target was right in front of them, He Wen started to order the loading of the mortars in front of the entire army. The feeling of being envied in front of so many people was just too good. Yang Qindong brought all the generals out. Especially the Mongolian army led by Na Risong. They had already put on their armor and were ready to charge. This was also Yang Qindong's compensation for them. Since they had suffered a loss yesterday, of course they had to make up for it today. On top of 8 Mile City, General Shurigan was looking at the scene below with his soldiers. This is the Red Barbarian Cannon. Because it was located in a remote area, the Rising Sun Gon had never really come into contact with this thing. However, they had heard that it existed. Now that they saw it in front of the city, they could not help but be shocked. Then, they shouted at their soldiers, "Quick, find a place to hide, quick!" Although he had never seen the power of the cannon, he believed that since the 5-star army had waited for so long, they would not hesitate when they attacked. Under Shurigan's shouts, the soldiers of Turkmenistan quickly found a place to hide. However, because they did not have enough knowledge, most of the soldiers only hid under the battlements. In his opinion, with the city walls as a defense, it was already safe enough. Regarding the reaction of the people on top of the city, Commander Hewan acted as if he did not hear anything. At this moment, he was still meticulously completing his actions. He ordered his men to adjust the measuring stick and make the necessary preparations. The cannon was being prepared in an orderly manner. Commander Hewan acted as if he did not hear the reaction of the Turkmenistan soldiers below the city gates. This was because he knew that once the cannons were fired, it would be difficult to say where he would be safe. Therefore, whether he hid or not, or where he hid, would be the same. The 5-star army was waiting in formation, especially the Mongolian cavalry led by Na Risong. Although Yang Qindong had said that they could only attack after half an hour of bombardment, he was still fully prepared. The sun hung high in the sky, and from time to time, a cold wind would blow, but at this moment, many people no longer felt anything. Everyone's attention was focused on the 5 pitch-black iron blocks at the front. They were waiting to see how powerful they would be next. Among the cavalry, it was not that no one had seen the power of cannons before. However, most of them had only seen cannons firing 1 round at a time. Not many of them had seen 5 cannons firing at the same time. The result was not something they could imagine. Everything that was about to happen next made them not even want to blink. They were afraid that they would miss something. Finally, under everyone's anticipation and complicated thoughts, the 5 100mm mortars were ready. The cannons were also loaded. They only needed to wait for the final order to fire 5 rounds. Chapter 1205. Hewan didn't immediately give the order because this was the first time he had to deal with something like this. Although Yang Xia was powerful, his ability to rely on cannonballs was still very weak. The process wasn't up to standard, so out of 10 cannonballs, only 1 or 2 could actually be used. This made them have no choice but to use them sparingly. This was also the reason why cannons weren't widely used until now. It was because the technology wasn't mature enough. Everything depended on a large probability and hard work. It was because of the preciousness of cannonballs that Hewan couldn't help but turn around to look at Yang Qindong. He was waiting for the 6th young master to give the final order. He didn't say anything and only nodded his head, representing Yang Qindong's attitude. Normally, a city with only 50,000 people and 20,000 soldiers didn't need to be so big. However, the shameless sneak attack yesterday made Yang Qindong unhappy. Even if he had to waste some cannonballs, he wanted to make the enemy pay the price. He wanted to tell the world what the consequences of messing with the 5-star army were. After receiving the final order, Hewen's eyes flashed with excitement. He quickly turned around and shouted with a red flag in his hand, "Cannoneers, prepare to fire." Fire! Hewen shouted with all his strength, causing the veins on his neck to pop out. Along with this shout, boom 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 boom. The 5 cannons roared at the same time, and a beam of fire shot out from the barrel. With a speed that couldn't be followed by the naked eye, it flew towards 8 Mile City, which was 300 meters away. Under the rumbling sound, it attracted the neighs of war horses. Boom, 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 boom. The cannons rumbled, and the 100mm mortars showed their ferocious side, mercilessly attacking the target. They hadn't seen the cannons of the future explode all over the mountain and raze it to the ground. This made the people at that time look like ignorant children. Occasionally, they would see a grenade explode, and they would exclaim in surprise. In the eyes of such people, the power of the 100mm mortar was as terrifying as the nuclear bomb tests of the later generations. This was especially so when the mortar landed below the city wall and instantly blasted a large hole in it. Many people were dumbfounded and revealed looks of disbelief. There were also countless people who kept rubbing their eyes at that moment. They wanted to make sure that what they were seeing was real, or that they had been traveling in a dream. Compared to the shock and doubt of these people, the Turpan soldiers and civilians who were the ones being attacked felt the reality of the situation. When the cannonballs whizzed over their heads or exploded beside them, cries and curses could be heard all over the place. Houses collapsed in an instant, stones flew everywhere, shops burned, and severed limbs suddenly appeared on the streets. When fresh and bloody flesh was thrown everywhere, it was like hell on earth. In the next second, no one knew where the cannonball would land. It was like the sword of Damocles hanging over everyone's head, making them feel nothing but fear. No one knew what would happen in the next second. No one knew if they would still be alive in the next second. In the next second, would he become the target of the explosion and be blown into pieces? The morale of the soldiers and the people began to collapse at that moment. The inside of the city was like hell on earth. Every breath seemed to pass by very slowly. Outside the city, many soldiers of the 5-star army were dumbfounded. Among them were some company commanders, battalion commanders, regiment commanders, and even division commanders. Many of them knew that cannons were very powerful, especially the 5-star army's cannons. They had tried their best to overestimate the power of the cannons, but they could not help but be amazed. The reality was more spectacular and powerful than they had imagined. It could only be said that their imagination still needed to be improved and increased. Because of that, many people were secretly sizing up He Wen's 2nd Regiment, who was still firing the cannons. Many people were also amazed by Bugnam of Gojoseon's strength and power. This was because he was the one who had invented and created these things under his guidance. Fire. He Wen was still waving the little red flag. At that moment, he had entered a half-crazy state. Every time he fired a cannon, his face would turn red. He was immersed in this moment. Enough. Yang Qindong looked at the watch on his wrist. He looked at Beta Persei next to him and said softly. This voice also awakened Beta Persei, who was also in shock. Although he was Yang Qindong's guard, it was rare to see a scene like this. Yes. Beta Persei responded and quickly rode to He Wen's side. He said loudly, Young Master's order is to stop firing. Stop loading cannons. He Wen quickly reacted and shouted. Then, he had a distressed look on his face. Looking at the empty cannonball boxes, he wanted to cry but had no tears. This time, they had fired more than 10 cannonballs than planned. These were the treasures of the 4th Division. He really didn't know how the division commander would deal with him if he saw them. The rumbling of the cannonballs finally stopped. Narisatsu, who was half a beat slower, finally reacted. When he looked around, he found that the city gate that was 8 miles away had already flown away. There was not even a shadow of the enemy in sight. He could not help but laugh and then shouted, Mongolian cavalry, listen to my order. Follow me and kill. After the word kill was spoken, the scimitar was unsheathed. Then, the sound of horse hooves shook the sky. Take advantage of the situation. The Mongolian cavalry's complicated situation had arrived. No one would have thought that just yesterday, the Mongolian cavaliers would be caught off guard and killed by the Mongolian cavaliers. It had only been a day, and their chance for revenge had presented itself. Facing an opponent who also had no ability to resist, they began a massacre that was unique to them. They had long been ordered to attack without mercy. This time, the Mongolian cavalry only faced 20,000 Turpan soldiers who were defending the city. There were also civilians who wanted to resist with sticks and even pots and pans. In short, there was no right or wrong in war, because everything was wrong. Enemies were not absolute either. Those who had weapons were enemies. Nearly 20,000 Mongolian cavaliers charged into the city like ferocious beasts, causing the city that was already covered in blood to become even dimmer. This day was destined to be a day in hell for the soldiers and civilians who were 8 miles away from the city. Yang Chendong rode on his horse as if he did not hear all of this. It was not that his heart was as hard as stone, but he knew very well that evil people needed to be dealt with by evil people. Perhaps some people would understand that if you respected them, they would return the favor tenfold. But to some people, if you backed down, you would only be seen as a sign of weakness. To such people, only by killing them could one completely subdue them mentally and physically, such that they would never dare to have any thoughts of resistance. Naturally, this was a way to treat the symptoms but not the root of the problem. But it did not matter. Yang Chendong still had a backup plan, which was to move the civilians away. When a place was filled with strangers, their so-called national spirit would naturally crumble. If they could live a good life, then no one would rebel. A war that could not be considered a war that was just a massacre, finally ended after the Mongolian cavalry vented their anger. After the battle, out of the 20,000 Turpan soldiers, over 8,000 were killed, and the captives were all injured. Out of the 50,000 civilians, over 5,000 died, and many were injured. This was the result of playing tricks with the 5-star army. Maybe if they did not play tricks and fought head-on, they would not have suffered such heavy losses. What was worth mentioning was that the defending general, Shurigan, had died under a giant rock. One could deduce that a cannonball had blown up the battlements, and unfortunately, it landed on his body. A Turpan heavy general actually died just like that on the ground. It was as his name implied, storm, he died in a storm. Your Majesty, your subordinate is untalented. About 200 cavalrymen escaped, and we were unable to catch up. Na Rizong appeared in front of Yang Chendong, his body reeking of blood. No worries, someone needs to report. Yang Chendong did not care about this at all. He even felt that the number of people who escaped was too little. In his eyes, those soldiers who had seen such a scene would not be able to fight against the 5-star army. The shadow in their hearts was their greatest enemy. 8 Mile City, which was seen as a natural stronghold, was lost just like that. From the start of the attack to the complete occupation, it took less than 4 hours. When the 200 cavalry that escaped scattered, and a portion of them returned to Turpan City, it was already the night of the second day. The new king, Harden Barter, was woken up from the palace, and he learned about what had happened from the general on duty. What? 8 Mile City was lost, the 20,000 troops were wiped out, and Shurigan general died in battle. After hearing the report from the general on duty, Harden Barter fell back into his throne, his eyes devoid of light. How could this be? How could this be? After a long while, Harden Barter finally sobered up, but he still couldn't stop himself from blurting out this sentence. King, I heard from the soldiers that escaped that the 5-star army used a powerful cannon that turned the entire 8 Mile City into hell. When the general on duty said this, his whole body trembled. He couldn't help but think that if this was true, then how could they use swords and spears to fight against the cannons? What was the difference between this and throwing away their lives? Cannons? Powerful cannons? How is this possible? This king has also heard of the Great Ming's Divine Machine Battalion, but it was not that powerful. Harden Barter asked in disbelief. Chapter 1206. But the soldiers who escaped all said so. My king, how should we deal with these people? The general on duty asked carefully. Because he was a general, he knew that if this matter was spread out, it would affect the morale of the army. He was afraid that no one would dare to fight against the 5-star army. How should we deal with them? Lock them all up. If anyone dares to say anything, behead them on the spot. Harden Barter was indeed an ambitious person. He quickly thought of the crux of the matter and revealed a ferocious look to the general on duty. "Understood, my king." The general on duty nodded and went out to handle the matter. In fact, he wanted to say that it wasn't just these people who escaped. There were also some soldiers who ran away who didn't know where. He was afraid that the news couldn't be hidden. However, he didn't dare to say anything because he was afraid of Harden Barter's gaze. He was afraid that his king would let him handle this matter. Wouldn't that be asking for trouble? The general on duty was right. At this time, the news couldn't be hidden anymore. This was because the soldiers who escaped were already terrified. When they escaped, some of them randomly chose a direction and ended up in different cities. This news spread along with these people. However, this wasn't the most depressing thing. What really made the Turpan kingdom unable to bear was General Dai Qin, who had already led 30,000 troops to battle. While he was on his way to the city of Bali with 5,000 cavalry and 25,000 infantry, they met with the new army of the Third Army, which was marching towards Turpan. When the scouts from both sides met, there was naturally a bloody battle. Then, the news spread back to each side. He was leading the new army of 20,000 people on the road when he suddenly heard the scouts say that there was a foreign race army ahead. There were about 30,000 of them and most of them were infantry. This news made Suhi's body shake and he was very excited. Since leaving the Liaodong region, Suhi and the new army had been hurrying along. They didn't even fight a decent battle. Even when they were outside the beginning city, they were merely chasing after the enemy. This made him feel stifled. Yang Qindong trusted him so much that he brought him wherever he went, but his contribution was too small. Just as he was vexed and thinking about how to achieve great things in Turpan, the opportunity finally came. Inform all divisions to launch a fierce attack in company units. The two armies had suddenly met, and there was no time to prepare a battle plan. However, Suhi trusted his officers. He believed that they would not fail their mission and inflict heavy losses on the enemy. Although such an encounter came very suddenly, the new three armies had already undergone the corresponding training. At this moment, it was the time for them to display their subjective initiative. What mattered was which officer reacted faster, and the rewards would naturally be greater. He had been by Yang Qindong's side for many years and had fought with his opponents for a long time. He had seen all kinds of situations and had made all kinds of preparations. None of this was a problem. The new army had such confidence. But in comparison, Dai Qin didn't have such ability. This didn't mean that Dai Qin's commanding ability wasn't good, but that the reaction of his soldiers was much worse. When the scouts at the front sent news that they suddenly met the 5-star army 10 miles ahead, Dai Qin's first reaction was that it was impossible. It could be said that he was unlucky. Because he was traveling on the official road, he didn't encounter a single deserter who was scared out of their wits. Naturally, he didn't believe that there would be a large number of 5-star army in the hinterland of Turpan. 8 Mile City was guarded by the Rising Sun Gon and 20,000 elites, so it couldn't be broken through so easily. It must be a small group of the 5-star army that charged in from who knows where. This was Dai Qin's first reaction. But out of caution, he ordered the army to stop moving forward. He would personally bring 5,000 cavalry to see what was going on. In Dai Qin's mind, the 5-star army wouldn't have too many people. With him leading 5,000 cavalry, it would be enough. Even if they really encountered a large number of enemy troops, he would still have the chance to retreat and form a defensive line. At that time, as long as he could hold the enemy here and then ask for reinforcements from the king, he could even launch a pincer attack with the Rising Sun Gon general. This would deal a heavy blow to the 5-star army and make a great contribution. To be able to think of such a plan in such a short time, Dai Qin could be considered a qualified general. But he neglected two important points. First, the so-called pincer attack only had one side left. This meant that this plan wouldn't work. Second, not only were his opponents strong, his 30,000 troops couldn't compare to them. It had been more than 10 years, and the Turpan kingdom had not had any wars with the outside world. Their army had been living too comfortably. Although the training had been carried out before, when they encountered one of the elites under Yang Chendong's command, the new Third Army, it was naturally not enough. Not many people could predict the outcome of a battle before it even started, much less when General Dai Qin was still so confident. He brought 5,000 cavalry and charged out first. They were ferocious, like a dragon coming out of the sea. Under the envious gazes of the 20,000 infantry, the 5,000 cavalry charged out. Half of the 30,000 Turpan soldiers were new soldiers that joined in recent years. A complete conscription system was one of the most important military reforms in Turpan. In history, it was because they were one step ahead of other countries that the strength of their army was maintained at a very high level. The soldiers were old and needed to be replaced, or they were injured and were not suitable for prolonged battles. Furthermore, the country valued the soldiers and the corresponding policies improved, so the status of soldiers in the Turpan kingdom was not low. Because of this, many young people were attracted to join the army. More than half of the soldiers were young people who yearned for glory. It was said that a soldier who didn't want to be a general wasn't a good soldier. These people came because of this. The way to fulfill this wish was to enter the battlefield and kill the enemy. This was an advanced method of replacing soldiers. Even now, Yang Chendong didn't dare to try it. This was all because his goal was too big. He needed more experienced soldiers. If he eliminated all of them, he wouldn't have the time to train more new soldiers to fight and win. Turpan did it. One had to admit that they were very bold. However, this also had a fatal flaw. A soldier who had never seen blood would forever be a new recruit. They would not be able to understand the cruelty of the battlefield, nor would they understand how important it was to maintain a balanced mentality in this life-and-death situation. And now, it was time for the 5-star army to teach them a lesson. When the 5,000 cavalrymen walked past the new recruits with envy, they suddenly retreated. Just like when they left, the 5,000 cavalry were still 5,000 cavalry. But the difference was that they didn't have the high spirits from before. Instead, they were in a sorry state. If one had to use an idiom to describe it, it would be that they were like birds startled by the twang of a bow. Among them, the one who ran the fastest was the role model of many of the new soldiers, General Dai Qin. Dai Qin was originally full of confidence, but not long after he charged out, he saw the 5-star army cavalry covering the sky and earth. Especially when the enemy used companies as a unit, and each company had a bright 5-star flag. At that moment, it was as if the entire sky was dyed red. Dai Qin's pride instantly disappeared, and what replaced it was fear, and finally, he turned around and left. On such a battlefield, he could no longer analyze how many enemies there were. However, he knew that if he really led 5,000 cavalrymen into battle, it would be equivalent to sending lambs into a tiger's den. In the end, not a single one of them would be able to escape. How is this possible? There are so many enemies. What is Shurigan doing? Why didn't he report it? Why? As he retreated, he kept cursing Shurigan. Completely unprepared, Dai Qin was caught off guard. Facing the powerful new army, his confidence was gone. All he could think of was to retreat. To put it bluntly, it was to escape. One soldier was fearful, while the general was fearful. When the main commander had his fear embedded in his bones, it was easy to imagine how this battle would continue. There was no hope of winning this battle. The 5,000 cavalry returning so quickly gave the 25,000 infantry a lot of confusion. Some of the old soldiers who had participated in the war had a bad look on their faces. Experience seemed to have told them the answer. But for the new soldiers who were participating in the war for the first time, they couldn't understand. Some even naively thought, was this General Dai Qin's way of training the soldiers? Was it to test how fast the cavalry was? No matter what kind of thoughts these people had, the truth would tell everyone what had happened. Just as the 5,000 cavalry returned to the infantry camp, behind them, an eye-catching red flag appeared. Then, 10,000 horses galloped, as if Mount Tai was pressing down on them. At first, there was only one flag, then a few flags. But then, more and more red flags appeared. It was as if they suddenly grew in the sky, giving people a feeling that there was no end to them. And these red flags only came from one direction, the direction of the 30,000 Tulu army. Prepare to fight. Set up the formation. Archers, spearmen, step forward. Finally returning to the side of his own army, Dai Qin, whose expression was still uncertain, started to shout out orders. Even though he was frightened by the enemy's formation, but as a general, his responsibility was to command the battle. Even though he knew that the chances of victory were slim, he still had to do it. This was his mission. Chapter 1207. Dai Qin was already standing at the position he was supposed to be standing at, and the order had already been read out by him. If it was during training, with his shout, the soldiers below would definitely obey in unison. The archers and pikemen would definitely have rushed to the front, and behind them, the Piaolans and short-bladed soldiers would have started to raise stakes and set up tripping ropes and other things. It could be said that the Turkopan kingdom had put in a lot of effort in training to deal with cavalry. This caused their confidence to swell, and they dared to face any opponent or provocation. However, training was still training. They didn't even know what a drill was. When they were actually on the battlefield, these things suddenly became so useless. When they saw the enemy cavalry approaching from all directions, when they felt the earth tremble at this moment, when they felt the breeze that blew against their faces, when they felt a wave of austere air, when they felt a wave of murderous intent, the minds of the recruits were completely blank. At this moment, they couldn't remember what military order, what training program, and even where they were supposed to stand. Everyone could only stare blankly in front of them. The enemy is here, what are you waiting for? Cavalry, release the arrows. Dai Qin noticed this scene and felt a chill in his heart. They had never been to a war before, but when the real war came, they were afraid of the enemy. Seeing that the 5-star army was getting closer and closer, they didn't have much time left. Dai Qin roared and gave the order to the cavalry beside him to shoot. He wanted to use blood to tell these recruits that they were on the battlefield and not training. If they didn't pay attention, then the only thing that awaited them was death. The 5,000 cavalry made up of all veterans looked much better than the recruits. When they heard General Dai Qin's order, although they couldn't bear it, they were after all their comrades, their countrymen. However, military orders were like mountains, and they couldn't afford to hesitate or slack off. Arrows were nocked and arrows were prepared. Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. One after another, iron-tipped bows and arrows flew through the air, shooting toward the very front of their own troops, where the archers and spearmen were supposed to be in formation and ready to defend against the enemy. Swoosh, 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 the arrows all fell, hitting the backs of the unprepared and stunned soldiers. In just one wave of attacks, at least hundreds of people were killed or injured. Fresh blood assailed their nostrils. When death was right in front of them, some of the recruits were so scared that their footsteps became unsteady. They didn't know where to go. However, even more soldiers were awakened by the shock. Their thoughts finally returned to reality, and they already knew that they had to pick up their weapons and prepare for battle. Being forced to do so was also a very correct way to deal with it. Instead of seeing blood, one would be afraid of blood. The moment one saw blood, it was easier to arouse the heroic spirit and fighting spirit in one's heart. One had to admit that Dai Qin had made the right bet. At the very least, under his orders, at the cost of losing several hundred people, the enthusiasm of the vanguard army was aroused. They finally knew their duty and what they should do next to avoid more deaths and more bloodshed. 3 miles away, the vanguard of the 5-star army had already entered. The new 3 armies formed by the elites of the various Mongolian races were coming over with an imposing aura. They spurred their horses forward, and as they charged, they held their bows in their hands. Shining arrows were pulled out from their quivers, and they were prepared to shoot from afar. For an army that had just come back from the battlefield of one nation and had made many contributions, they knew how to perform on the battlefield in order to kill the enemy as much as possible and protect themselves as best as possible. Some tactical actions were like blood was thicker than water, and they had become a habit. Just like right now, they were bending over their horses, minimizing their own targets to ensure that when the enemy's arrows came, the possibility of hitting them would be minimized. The moment they looked ahead with bright eyes, they were like a pack of wolves on the grassland, locking onto their prey. This instinct, along with the countless brushes with death, made many of them instinctively feel the threat of death. What kind of enemy could pose a threat to them, and what kind of arrows could hit their positions? When they looked over, they already had a general understanding in their hearts. Therefore, when they saw the performance of the Turpan soldiers, the threat they felt wasn't strong, and could even be said to be weak. The enemy's strength isn't strong, and their morale is low. Take this chance, charge. A company commander at the front, after making a judgment based on his intuition, gave the order to his 100 soldiers. There were many other company commanders like this. Most of them crawled out from piles of corpses. Maybe they couldn't read much, and couldn't speak much, but one had to admit that they had a lot of experience in commanding on the battlefield. A tiger leading a pack of wolves to fight a wolf leading a pack of sheep, this result seemed to have been decided a long time ago. There was a saying in the world about the food chain. What you eat is predetermined a long time ago. Even if there were some miracles, it didn't mean that this principle would be easily changed. Just like now, the 30,000 Turpan soldiers led by Daichin couldn't create any miracles. Release the arrows. When the distance between the two sides was less than 200 meters, General Daichin on the horse let out an angry roar. Technically, they weren't completely within the range of the arrows, but Daichin still gave the order. He was afraid that if the distance was too close, the archers would show their cowardly side again. After the order was given, the 5,000 archers didn't hesitate to release the arrows in their hands. The results of their training finally showed. At least after the order was given, they could execute it. This was already not an easy thing to do. As for the reaction of the soldiers, if General Daichin had to give it a score, he would give it at least 70 points. 5,000 arrows were shot from afar, towards the 5-star Army's vanguard cavalry. Under the rain of arrows, there seemed to be no place that was safe. Facing the attack of the arrows, the new Army's cavalry showed their rich battle experience. Just like in modern warfare, there were veterans who could accurately predict where the bullets would land and where the cannonballs would land. Many of the cavalry soldiers made all kinds of dodging actions. Some leaned their bodies to the side of their horses, some pulled their horses to the side, some waved their cavalry swords in front of them, and some jumped off their horses and rolled to the ground. No matter what kind of dodging action, it was all based on their position. If they could dodge, they would dodge. If they couldn't dodge, they would block. If they couldn't block, they would abandon their horses. The 5-star Army's military rules had one requirement in this area. How to protect oneself to the greatest extent under the rain of arrows was the most important. As for whether the posture was the same, whether it looked good or not, no one paid attention to it. Under all kinds of dodging actions, the 5,000 arrows only caused a few hundred horses to be shot, and a few hundred soldiers to be injured or killed. Among them, the number of injured soldiers was far greater than the number of dead soldiers. This naturally had to do with the rich battle experience of the new Army's cavalry, but at the same time, it also had to do with the fact that the Turpan army had fired their arrows too early. Most of the arrows weren't in range, so they didn't threaten the safety of the new Army's cavalry. Reflect. After the first wave of arrows, the new Army's cavalry began their counterattack. It was impolite not to reciprocate. Under the speed of the war horses, the distance of a few hundred meters was covered in a flash. Right now, the distance between the two sides was less than 100 meters, which was the optimal range for the arrows. The new Army's cavalry began their counterattack. Unlike the blind arrows of the Turfan archers, the arrows of the 5-star Army cavalry were very methodical. Based on the positions they occupied, they would choose the opponents closest to them to ensure that each arrow would only target one person, and there would be no duplicates. As such, the vanguard consisted of 6,000 to 7,000 cavalrymen, and the damage dealt by the arrows was on a completely different level from the Turpan archers. When the first wave of arrows landed on the ground, over 1,000 Turpan archers were knocked down to the ground. And all of this was just the beginning. After the first wave of arrows, they didn't need to wait for the previous arrow to hit the enemy. This was an instinct of the 5-star Army's cavalrymen. They weren't like the Turpan archers, who still needed to wait for the result after firing an arrow. Then, they would nervously grab their quiver and reload the arrows. This created a situation where the speed of the arrows was completely different. Over 1,000 Turpan archers were knocked to the ground, which greatly disrupted the speed of their arrows. In addition, they were already nervous to begin with, so the speed at which they took out their arrows was much slower than before. As a result, when the second wave of arrows was released, both sides were actually at the same frequency. Whoosh whoosh whoosh, whoosh whoosh whoosh, the scene of arrows clashing appeared. Both sides released thousands of arrows at the same time, rushing towards the opposite side. As a result, some of the arrows actually collided with each other in midair, producing a series of crackling sounds of iron weapons colliding with each other. Then, another large group of Turpan archers were knocked to the ground. Previously, they didn't even have the advantage when they attacked first, let alone when they were shooting at the same time. In the eyes of many Turpan archers, they already had no target. All they could do was instinctively shoot. If they couldn't even see the target's position, how could they talk about accuracy? Archers, back off. Spearmen, get ready. General Daichin's heart ached as he looked at this scene. The performance of his own archers was not as good as he expected. Coincidentally, the performance of the enemy's archers was so good. He knew that if they continued to shoot arrows, his losses would only be greater. Now, he placed his bet on the second group of spearmen. He noticed that after a short period of confusion, these spearmen were gradually getting into the right state of mind. Chapter 1208. The archers began to retreat, while the spearmen began to advance. Their shining spears were like a spear formation, waiting for the cavalry of the 5-star army to charge over and pierce through them, giving them a 10,000 spears piercing the heart. The performance of the spearmen was seen by General Daichin and he couldn't help but let out a sigh of relief. Luckily, his training wasn't in vain. After a short period of chaos, they started to get into their roles. Now it was time to deal a heavy blow to the 5-star army. Although it wouldn't be a sure win, it would at least result in a heavy blow. Next would be the final battle between the two sides. The outcome of the battle would be 50-50. Daichin's expression started to return to normal. He wanted to see how the 5-star army would deal with his spear formation. It must be known that even if he brought 5,000 cavalry to charge in, he wouldn't be able to gain any advantage. An inch long, an inch strong. The cavalry wouldn't be able to charge in and would have to face the sharp spears. They would die without a doubt. It's the spearmen, surround them. Daichin's face was filled with anticipation. The new army's cavalry also discovered the enemy's formation. Then, the company commanders who were in charge of commanding the troops showed disdainful expressions. That's right. Once a warhorse came into contact with a spear, the consequences would be unimaginable. It would be like a lion plunging straight into a well full of thorns. This was also the reason why many armies were used to using spearmen to deal with cavalry. But the new army's cavalry weren't lions. They were humans with intelligence. Seeing that the pikemen had already formed their formation and charging forward would be suicidal, why didn't they circle around them? As the company commanders gave the order to surround the pikemen, the cavalry of the new Third Army suddenly split up from the middle, moving towards the two sides of the Turban infantry that were waiting for them in formation. What? The 5-star Army's cavalry's response was seen by Daichin. His eyes couldn't help but widen. It must be said that surrounding the enemy wasn't a profound battle tactic. The ancient battle formations were mysterious and could be used in any battle. However, when the 5-star army was less than 30 meters away from the spear formation, they were still able to change their formation in such an orderly manner. This was not an easy thing to do. The greatest advantage of a cavalry charge was speed. Under extreme speed, the strength of the saber would often be amplified by several times or even 10 times. For example, when the cavalry charged, each swing of their sabers carried a force of a few hundred jin. This was something that could only be achieved when the man and the horse were one. This resulted in many scenes where the heads of the infantrymen would fly to the sky after the cavalry swung their sabers. It was precisely because the speed was too fast that it created a huge flaw, which was that it couldn't change directions at will. At least, it couldn't change directions as freely as it could with two legs. It was precisely because of this that Dai Qin decided to use the pike soldier when the distance between the two sides was relatively close. This was to catch the opponent off guard and prevent the opponent from being able to change his direction in time. With 6,000 archers in front, they were densely packed and blocked the vision of the 5-star army's cavalry. This increased the concealment of the pike soldier. Suddenly using the pike soldier would increase the chances of dealing a fatal blow to the enemy. But now, the 5-star army's cavalry actually changed their direction so easily. It looked like they were doing it so skillfully. How could General Dai Qin not be shocked? This was the first time the enemy was fighting on the battlefield. Everyone wasn't very clear about the enemy's attacking methods. This made it easier for them to use their trump cards. But looking at the 5-star army, it was as if they already knew about the pike soldiers' ambush. What was going on? On this point, one couldn't help but say that Dai Qin's vision was limited. He thought that he was able to lead his troops well. First the archers, then the pike soldiers' sudden appearance would definitely catch the enemy off guard. But what he didn't know was that this tactic had been used by the Japanese army for a long time. As a new army that had fought against the Japanese army and won, they were already used to this tactic. Right now, the Turpan army was just following in the footsteps of the Japanese army. There really wasn't anything new to speak of. But to the Turpan army that hadn't fought in a war for many years, under this kind of speed, the cavalry could still change their direction. This was too shocking. And if Dai Qin knew that Yang Chendong had given a strict order that the cavalry could only display their full speed when attacking the enemy. Under other circumstances, they couldn't maintain their full speed and had to be prepared to change their direction at any time, then he wouldn't be so shocked. As mentioned before, the new army's composition was mostly made up of the warriors of the grassland tribes. A large portion of them were cavalry warriors that had fought with Tuachuo Buhuacan before. For such experts, changing direction at a distance of 30 meters wasn't difficult at all. Even if it wasn't as easy as eating and drinking, it wasn't much different. The vanguard cavalry of the new army changed their direction and surrounded the Turpan army from both sides. While they were half surrounding the Turpan army, the bows in their hands weren't idle. They shot towards the Turpan army from both sides. The Turpan army's archers had already retreated and returned to their formation. It was impossible to counterattack in a short period of time. This allowed the new army's cavalry to focus on their targets without worrying about being reflected back. Arrows flew through the air, occasionally taking the lives of the Turpan army's soldiers. Among them, most of the soldiers were short-bladed soldiers. Piao Dao soldiers split into two sides and protect the formation. Seeing the soldiers being easily killed by the 5-star army's cavalry, General Dai Qin's heart was bleeding. He had no choice but to change the formation again. After the order was given, the short-bladed soldiers outside the formation started to move inwards. The Piao Dao soldiers inside the formation started to move outwards. There was a bit of chaos in between the two sides. Luckily, there were lessons like this during training, so they didn't lose their composure immediately. As the Piao Dao soldiers walked out of the formation, the arrows of the 5-star army's cavalry became powerless. Most of the arrows were blocked by the shields. Once the situation stabilized, General Dai Qin let out a sigh of relief. At the same time, he gave another order for the archers to walk out of the formation. He was going to start the counterattack. Infantry had a natural disadvantage against cavalry. On this point, Dai Qin had his own understanding. Thus, he didn't feel much pain when he lost 1,000 men. He also believed that once the archers reached the outside and started the counterattack, they would be able to turn the situation around. After all, the 5-star army's vanguard cavalry only had 6,000 to 7,000 men. He had 30,000 troops in his hands. Fuck, if you want to counterattack, I'll give you the chance. My men, follow me and charge. A company commander on the left side of the Turfan army noticed the change in the enemy's formation. He cursed and led his men, who were still alive, to charge. The ones on the outside were only Piao Dao soldiers. According to the saying, they had a natural disadvantage against cavalry and were completely countered. When faced with the sudden charge of the cavalry, even though there were only a company of 100 men, they still managed to carve out a huge gap, killing over 100 Piao soldiers. This caused the formation of the Turfan army to change again and again, becoming even more chaotic. With an example, the other company commanders realized that this charge was very effective. They all followed suit. More and more companies joined the charge. In a moment, the Turfan army that seemed to have a tight defense started to fall into chaos. What was worse was that before the battle, General Su He had said that the divisions, regiments, and battalions could attack on their own. This meant that all the initiative was handed over to the company commander of the first company. In this way, some companies launched a charge, while some companies continued to launch long-range attacks with their bows and arrows. Such a completely uncoordinated attack made General Dai Qin feel a sense of helplessness. If the Piao Dao soldiers retreated, they would face the arrows. If they didn't retreat, they would face the charge of the 5-star army. No matter how he looked at it, it wouldn't solve the problem. In just this moment of hesitation, many of the 5-star army cavalry had already charged into the Turfan army and started a crazy massacre. Some of the Piao Dao soldiers, and archers became their main targets. This also made Daiqin's plan to counterattack fail. It was also at this moment that more and more of the new army cavalry came from afar. They were preparing to join the attack formation. Seeing that their advantage in numbers was about to disappear, General Daiqin sighed and quickly brought his 5,000 cavalry to lead the army and run towards the back. This move was very timely. Because if it was 15 minutes later, the new army cavalry would have surrounded them from both sides. At that time, even if Daiqin could charge out, he would have lost at least half of his 5,000 cavalry, or even more. With General Daiqin's escape, the already chaotic formation instantly collapsed. Without a unified command, the general didn't know the soldiers, and the soldiers didn't know the general. Adding on the appearance of the new army cavalry, it was like the last straw on the camel's back. In an instant, the infantry formation completely collapsed. The new army cavalry used this chance to charge into the formation, raising their sabers to kill while shouting the slogan of surrendering to avoid death. No one wanted to die, especially when they knew that they were losing. More and more Turfan soldiers knelt on the ground and threw down the weapons in their hands. The battle was over. Out of the 25,000 Turfan infantry, around 5,000 died or were injured. The remaining 20,000 all surrendered, not a single one escaped. The new army only paid the price of around 1,000 cavalry killed or injured. This great victory made Commander Su He overjoyed, and at the same time, he rewarded the company commander who was the first to launch the attack on the spot. At the same time, this victory was also reported to King Wu Nan, Yang Chendong, who was coming from behind by telegram. Chapter 1209. Good, the first battle was a great victory. Looking at the contents of the telegram, Yang Chendong was in a good mood and laughed loudly. Logically speaking, the first battle was to take down the 8-mile gap. In that battle, they had taken down the eastern gate of the Tulyafan kingdom with almost 0 losses. But in Yang Chendong's eyes, all of this was due to the artillery. Anyone with such a powerful weapon could achieve such an effect. On the contrary, the new army's first battle, killing 5,000 enemies and capturing 20,000 prisoners, this was the real victory on the battlefield. Announce the contents to the entire army and commend Commander Su He. Yang Chendong said with a laugh as he returned the telegram to Wang Shan. Yes. Wang Shan replied, then turned and left. Beta Persei frowned and asked carefully and worriedly, Young master, won't such a commendation cause dissatisfaction among the other commanders? It's not good for unity. Haha. Yang Qindong waved his hand and said, winning the battle and making great contributions should be rewarded. It's to let the entire army know and put pressure on the other commanders. All of this was intentional by Yang Qindong. He wanted to let the new army win the battle and stimulate the other commanders so that they would also rush to make contributions. Only in this way could he solve the problem in Yilabali as quickly as possible. In Yang Qindong's plan, Yilabali was just one of the tens of thousands of places to be conquered. He couldn't waste too much time in such a place. What he needed to do was to sweep everything with the power of thunder. This not only required his own efforts, but also the joint efforts of the other commanders. Delegating power was what Yang Qindong had to do to achieve his goal. If everything was under his command, he could win one battle, win two battles. But if power was handed over to the commanders, then small victories would accumulate to great victories, and finally complete the victory in the shortest time and extent. This was what he wanted to see. The telegram was sent very quickly and spread throughout the army in the shortest amount of time. When the telegram was delivered to Major General Tianhu of the 1st Cavalry Division, a look of surprise flashed across his face. Then, he held the telegram tightly in his hand. Men, inform the 4 commanders to quickly come for a meeting. Tianhu's voice carried a hint of urgency. Several messengers immediately dispersed in all directions. Merely 2 hours later, the 5th Regiment commander, Gong Feng, who was the furthest away from the center of the army, also rushed over. At this point, the 5 regiment commanders had all gathered. While the 5 regiment commanders were still puzzled, Tianhu had already taken out the telegram that was full of wrinkles. After the 5 captains looked through them one by one, their expressions were extremely solemn. This time, the new army snatched the first prize, which was completely out of their expectations. According to Yang Qindong's military plan, the new army was going to attack the capital of Turpan. It was definitely going to be a tough nut to crack. Unless the 4th Division, who was in charge of logistics, arrived, who knew how much effort it would take to conquer it. But now, their luck was so good that they actually ran into the Turpan reinforcements and snatched a huge victory. This caused the 1st Cavalry Division, which originally wanted to take down Hobak Seri, near Kramer City, to fall behind by a step. By taking Hobak Seri, they had cut off the retreat of Ili to the north. This was very important. Yang Qindong didn't just want this huge piece of land. He wanted to eliminate all the opposing forces in this area and achieve complete peace. It was because of the importance of this mission that the 1st Cavalry Division was able to win over the strongest cavalry force. But now, Hobaks was still 100 li away, and the new army had already sent back news of victory. It was no wonder that everyone was unhappy. This is luck. The 3rd Regiment commander, Hu Bo-er's face was red as he stretched his neck. Isn't luck a reflection of strength? We only have 20,000 men, yet we managed to defeat 25,000 of the Turks. 20,000 of them were taken captive, and we only lost 1,000 of our own cavalry. How is this not a great victory? Tianhu said in a low voice. Even though he had always been competing with Su He, and knew that Su He's new army had always wanted to surpass him, as an opponent, he had to admit that Su He's new army had fought beautifully in this battle. Even in the eyes of the 1st Cavalry Division, this was the best they could do. After Tianhu's reprimand, Hu Bo-er didn't say anything else. He was convinced by this battle result. The 4th Regiment commander, Bai Shuang, also had his head lowered. He could feel the tension in the tent. It wasn't a good thing for a general to be anxious before the battle had even begun. He decided to stand out. He raised his head and said, "Division commander, regimental commanders, since the new army has already taken the credit, if we want to perform better, we have to think of a way to achieve the results." Think of a way to achieve the results? Regiment commander Bai, what do you mean? The 1st Regiment commander, Timu, scratched his head. He didn't dare to underestimate this student of Bugnam of Gojoseon anymore, but sometimes he just couldn't understand what he was saying. It's like this. Bai Shuang said humbly, "We won't be able to take the credit no matter what." Since that was the case, it was better not to think about it and focus on how to conquer Hobak Seri at the same time, while doing so at the same time with the least cost. Didn't the new army lose 1,000 men? If we only lose 100 men, or even less, to take down the target and report it to teacher, then don't you think we'll have contributed as much? These words made the other regimental commander's eyes light up. The 5th Regiment commander, Gong Feng, was the first to nod and say, "That's right. Regiment Commander Bai's words make sense. I agree. I agree as well." The 1st Regiment commander, Temu, also hurriedly expressed his opinion. The 2nd Regiment commander, Lu Duo, and the 3rd Regiment commander, Hu Bo, also expressed their opinions. Even Division Commander, Tian Hu, nodded in approval. Regiment Commander Bai, do you have any ideas? Yes, your subordinate does have an idea. If we want to force our way in, we'll have to suffer losses no matter what. Since that's the case, why don't we change it to using our wits? If Division Commander agrees, I'm willing to take a trip into the city and meet the enemy general guarding Hobaks, Bai Shuang said with a face full of confidence. Enter the tiger's den? Tian Hu frowned when he heard that. Then, he asked, how confident are you? At least 70%. Haha, Senior Master, no one would have thought that we would have such a big appetite. We would first cut off Yi Li's retreat to the north, and then we would have the opportunity to strike first. This is our advantage, and we would have the element of surprise. Bai Shuang explained the general idea in his mind to everyone. Soon, the tent was filled with discussions. Hobak Seri. As the northernmost city in Ili, the higher-ups never paid much attention to this place. In comparison, regardless of whether it was Turpan or Yirkiang, it was extremely far away. Thus, the general guarding the city had always been in a state of peace. No one would have thought that the great Ili's retreat would be cut off. Naturally, the general guarding Hobak Seri, Mediz, would never have thought of this. Even though he had already learned from other sources that Turpan's 8 miles lost formation was about to become the most advanced formation, he still couldn't raise the alarm in his heart. This was one of the most fatal manifestations of the lack of information. Due to the lack of consciousness, the gates of Hobak Seri were still wide open. From time to time, Ili's civilians could be seen entering and leaving. Bai Shuang walked into the city under such relaxed conditions. Bai Shuang didn't expect things to go so smoothly. When he and his 300 elite soldiers successfully entered the city after disguising themselves, he sighed for Mediz, and even more so for the entire city. Immediately send out a communication signal. Find our intelligence personnel in the city and get a clear picture of the situation. Bai Shuang said to one of his subordinates and then walked towards the largest inn in the city. As early as when Yang Chendong was dealing with the Japanese army, he had given orders to the intelligence department, asking them to find out the situation of the various forces in the Ili region as soon as possible, including the personal information of the generals. Bai Shuang's idea was very simple. Go straight to the root of the problem. Capture the general when the enemy was unprepared and take over Hobak Seri without shedding a drop of blood. All of this started when he entered the city. Now it seemed that everything was going smoothly. But what was unexpected was that the plan was still ruined by someone, and it was their own people who ruined it. All of this started after he checked into the inn and met the intelligence personnel of the security bureau. Wukong Wutsong was a mixed blood. His father was Han, and his mother was Uyghur. As a result, he had a tall figure and a handsome appearance. He was a department of the security bureau led by Yang San. Normally, the more ordinary an intelligence personnel was, the better. On the contrary, if he was too handsome or too outstanding, it wouldn't be suitable. But because of his unique background, Yang San finally gave him an important task after meeting and evaluating him. It could be said that if Wutsong performed well, his future would be limitless. After being valued by Yang San, Wutsong brought enough money to the Ili area to start his work. Hobak Seri was one of his main targets. According to Yang San, the 6th young master was a great emperor. He was particular about not doing anything, but when he did, he would amaze the world with a single brilliant feat. Once the enemy made a move in the Ili area, he had to do his best to get rid of them. With this principle in mind, Hobak Seri, which was the route to the north, naturally became a top priority. Wu Tsong put a part of his energy there. In order to get accurate first-hand information, he didn't hesitate to come to Hobak Seri in person. He thought he had done a good job and paid enough attention. But what Wu Tsong didn't expect was that there was another person who beat him to it. That was the sworn enemy of the Security Bureau, the CIA. Chapter 12:10. They had been established relatively late, but with the backing of the 7th Madam, Su Man, it meant that they had strong support and backing. In addition, they had opened up another path, and their members were all women, especially beautiful women. This made their abilities and influence not weaker than the Security Bureau. Just like in Hobak Seli City, the people from the CIA had the same idea as Wu Tsong and made a move first. Commander Bai, the CIA's team leader, Han Fong, contacted General Mediz before us, and Wu Tsong's report suddenly became a little hesitant. And what? Bai Shuang, who was listening seriously, looked at Wu Tsong in confusion. Although some things were not pleasant to hear, since Bai Shuang asked, Wu Tsong could only tell him the truth. And team leader Han Fong has changed her name to Madanazer. She will be married to Mediz tonight. What? Bai Shuang, who was a little surprised, stood up involuntarily and digested the news. He had heard that the CIA would often sacrifice themselves or even give themselves to others in order to achieve their goals. However, in his opinion, it was just a show. After all, in this era, women cherished their bodies and reputation very much. However, he did not expect it to be true. Looking at Wu Tsong's embarrassed expression, it was obvious that the truth of the matter was not to be doubted. Bai Shuang, who was extremely surprised, took a while to calm himself down. Team leader Wu, tell me more about Han Fong. Yes. After Wu Tsong agreed, he explained the situation in detail. According to him, Han Fong was not a Han. Instead, she was an authentic Xibe. She was born in an ordinary family, but because of her beauty, she could sing and dance since she was young. In the age of war, it was always difficult for women to find a good home. Han Fong's family was also drifting and difficult to settle down. Later on, when the origin city was established, it attracted the attention of many people of other races. The peaceful living environment, rich material and cultural life there attracted many knowledgeable people, and Han Fong was one of them. Because of her beauty, when she just turned 18, she was engaged to a new deputy battalion officer in Shicheng. Finally, her life was stable. However, the heavens were unpredictable. Her husband actually went to the battlefield and died in the battle with Ili Bali. She once again became a rootless duckweed. Fortunately, the 5-star army took good care of the families of martyrs, so she didn't have to sleep on the streets again. However, the quality of her life was also very different from before. It was at this time that an intelligence agent from the CIA took a fancy to her and recruited her into the organization. Later, with her outstanding performance, she became one of the core members of the organization. This time, when Han Fong heard that they were going to mobilize troops against Ili, she wanted to avenge her husband, so she naturally signed up. Because of her outstanding performance, she was appointed as the team leader. That was how she got in touch with Mediz first, but she didn't expect that she would take the risk herself. You said that she is the wife of a deputy battalion commander in the new army? After Bai Shuang heard this, he had a general understanding of the matter. However, when he thought about how this person was a family member of a 5-star army officer, and now, in order to complete his mission, he had to submit himself to the enemy's general. Naturally, he felt indignant. Yes. Wu Bun answered without daring to conceal anything. How bold of you. Don't you remember what the teacher said? No one can force the families of martyrs to do anything. The CIA dared to do this. Aren't they afraid that the teacher will punish them? At this moment, Bai Shuang was so angry that his face was red. Even if the CIA's backer was the 7th Madam, so what? In Bai Shuang's eyes, he couldn't use the families of martyrs as an excuse. Otherwise, it would make the officers and soldiers very sad. With Wu Tsong's status, he naturally didn't dare to voice out his doubts. Seventh Madam was an existence that a nobody like him couldn't afford to offend. If he really said something unpleasant, once it spread out, he was afraid that his head would be separated from his body. Not only could he not question it, but he also had to try his best to absolve it. It was not for anything else, but because he had to tell the truth. Commander Bai, I'm afraid it's not what you think. I've seen Han Feng once, and she also took the initiative to tell me that no one forced her to do what she did. Everything she did was voluntary. Voluntary? After Bai Shuang heard this, he didn't understand. I'm afraid she had no choice but to say that. After all, there are some people that a little girl like her can't afford to offend. It doesn't seem like it. Wu Tsong didn't know how to explain it, so he could only say what he felt. He could also see that Bai Shuang was very angry about this matter. This was one of the students that Bugnam of Gojoseon valued very much. On the other side was Bugnam of Gojoseon's seventh madam. He couldn't afford to offend either of them. Once the matter got out of hand, he didn't know if others would be in trouble, but it was very likely that he would be the first to be in trouble. After all, he only had the director of the security bureau, Yang San, behind him. Not to mention, his identity in the entire security bureau wasn't considered an important person. Even if Wu Tsong wanted to protect his own safety, he had to try his best to smooth things over. However, looking at Bai Shuang's angry appearance, he felt that the matter wouldn't be so easy to solve. That's enough. After this matter is settled, I will personally go and ask Han Feng. If she is willing, I will naturally not be able to say anything. However, if someone wants to force her, regardless of who is behind her, I will report this matter to teacher and demand an explanation. Bai Shuang could feel Wu Tsong's difficulty. In fact, he didn't want to offend the seventh madam because of other people's matters. However, since he encountered this matter, he would ask for justice. Wasn't this what Yang Chendong usually taught them? Putting this matter aside for the time being, Bai Shuang asked Wu Tsong, "You're saying that tonight is the day Mediz marries Han Feng? Then he will definitely hold a big banquet." Yes, now in the city of Hobak Seli, everyone with status has received an invitation. Well, Leader Wu, I'll have to trouble you to get me an invitation too. Bai Shuang nodded, his eyes revealing a terrifying sharpness. He had already investigated everything and had a perfect plan to take action. However, now, he had to take action early. He was afraid that if he was late, the martyr's widow would be humiliated. This was definitely something he didn't want to see and couldn't accept. Wu Tsong faintly guessed Bai Shuang's intention, but he couldn't refuse. The orders from above were for him to cooperate unconditionally. He could only sigh in his heart and clasped his fist. Please don't worry, Leader Bai. The invitation will be sent soon. With Wu Tsong's ability and the group under him operating in Hobak Seli for a while, it was just an invitation. It wasn't that complicated. In the afternoon, the invitation was sent to Bai Shuang. Considering that it was a banquet and not a battle, Bai Shuang didn't bring too many people. He only chose 4 elite warriors to follow him. At the same time, after making some arrangements for the people staying in the inn, when night came, he excitedly went to the general's mansion in the city. Mediz's mansion was now brightly lit and bustling with activity. Mediz, who was already in his 40s, already had a main wife and 4 concubines. Normally, there was no need to make such a big fuss when he was marrying a concubine. Moreover, it just so happened that the 5-star army was attacking, so everything should be done in a low-key manner. However, Medina Nazar had requested for a grand celebration. She claimed that she was getting married, and this was the happiest time in a woman's life. Of course, it had to be grand. Moreover, wouldn't such a grand wedding be able to achieve the purpose of consolidating and stabilizing the hearts of the people in the city? Mediz was speechless when he heard that. He thought about it and agreed. Of course, this was also the reason why he was drooling over her beauty. He had been in Ely for a long time, and had seen many women, but this was the first time he had seen someone as beautiful as Madenazer. If such a beauty had any request, as long as it was within his capabilities, he would naturally agree to it with a nod. Thus, there was such a lively scene. There were people coming and going in the courtyard of the general's mansion. There were all kinds of people wearing luxurious clothes, chatting in groups of 3 to 5. Bai Shuang, who was dressed like a wealthy merchant, also wore a set of luxurious clothes that the concubine had gotten him as he walked in the courtyard. He had a smile on his face, showing his friendly and amiable side. However, if one were to observe him closely, they would notice that his eyes were always looking into the distance from time to time. That was because he was observing the structure of the houses here, thinking about the best place to strike if he were to make a move. The original plan was to first figure out the military layout in the city, then take control of Mediz. This was double insurance. However, because of the matter with Han Fang, he had to make a move in advance, so he had to be careful. There were more and more people in the courtyard. Roughly counting, there were no less than 300 people, and they were either rich or respectable people. If this was the case, it was likely that almost all the people with some status in the city had arrived. Bai Shuang walked alone in the courtyard, shuttling through the crowd. His eyes even looked at the courtyard to the side. That was where all the followers were staying. As if he was walking casually, Bai Shuang came to a place very close to this courtyard, so that he could send out a signal and lure out 4 elite soldiers to help him. The sky was completely dark, and the auspicious time had arrived. The originally noisy courtyard quickly quieted down. In the direction of the main hall, the 7-foot-tall Mediz finally appeared. Just from his appearance, this person had a tall and sturdy physique, and was also a fierce general. It was a pity that the beard on his face made him look too old. When the bride, Medinaza, appeared beside him with the help of her maidservant, the contrast between the two was even stronger. Chapter 12:11. Haha, thank you all for coming. As the host, Mediz laughed heartily. After greeting everyone, he introduced her to everyone. This is my new concubine, Medinazer. Please say a few words to everyone. Aya, the general is so lucky. The general's charm is amazing, that's why the beauty likes him. The general is very brave, if I were the beauty, I would choose him too. Yes, this is what it means to be a beauty with a hero. I've finally seen this scene, ha ha ha. Immediately, the compliments came one after another. When Mediz heard it, he laughed even more heartily. It was truly a joyous scene. The compliments and bootlicking continued, but soon, a sweet and clear voice stopped. Medinazer spoke. Hello everyone, I'm Medinazer. Thank you all for coming tonight. Thank you. Aya, madam, there's no need to be so polite. This is what we should do. Yes, the general protects our safety. Now that he's happy, it's only right that we come to congratulate him. Following that was another wave of disgusting flattery. Mediz did not reject any of it and accepted it all. At that moment, he was very happy. He could not only get the beauty, he could also use this opportunity to receive a big gift. No matter how he thought about it, he was very happy. The flattery continued in the crowd. Someone started to make a fuss and asked the two to drink cross-cupped wine. Cross-cupped wine had long been spread from the Great Ming Dynasty. This was a new thing that Yang Qindong started, and it was quickly accepted by the crowd. Hearing this, Mediz naturally did not reject it. He laughed and said, "All right, let's drink. Men, bring the wine." There was no goblet or glass. Such an expensive item was simply out of reach. She brought over 2 exquisite porcelain cups and filled them with white wine. Then, she handed them to Mediz and Medinaza respectively. Then, under the watchful eyes of the crowd, a man and a woman, one old and one young, intertwined their arms together. This scene also attracted the cheers of many onlookers. Unlike everyone else, Bai Shuang, who was hidden in the crowd, was ready to send out a signal. He would not allow himself to see a martyr's widow begging the enemy's general. even though doing so would greatly reduce his chances of success. After all, most of the 300 elite soldiers he brought were outside the general's residence. There were only 4 soldiers inside the residence. Even so, he still wanted to rush out and stop everything. In his eyes, this was his mission, the mission of an ordinary 5-star army officer. Of course, he had to admit that Han Feng, who had changed her name to Madanazer, was really beautiful. When he first saw her, even he was stunned. Bai Shuang was ready to act. As soon as he blew the whistle, the 4 elite soldiers would immediately rush into the courtyard with their weapons and kill at will. If possible, it would be best if they could subdue Mediz. Even if it was not possible, he wanted to create chaos here and give the 300 elite soldiers enough time to rush in and surround everything. Bai Shuang, who had already made up his mind and was about to blow the whistle, suddenly stopped. What happened next was completely out of his expectations. Madanazer, who was drinking wine, suddenly had a shiny dagger in her left hand. At this moment, she was pressing it against Mediz's neck. This was a very dramatic scene. Everyone in the courtyard was shocked and stood there as if they were petrified. Even at this moment, many people still did not understand what was happening. Was this a prearranged show? The reason why they said this was because the other main character, Mediz, did not show any signs of panic. On the contrary, his expression was normal. It was as if the target of the dagger was not him, but someone else who had nothing to do with him. The courtyard suddenly became silent. This scene also made Bai Shuang stop what he was doing. He wanted to see what Han Feng was trying to do. He. Under everyone's attention, Mediz laughed sinisterly. What's wrong, madam? What are you doing? Don't you know that swords have no eyes? It's easy to hurt people like this, and it's even easier to hurt yourself. As he spoke, Mediz raised his left hand to remove the dagger from his neck. However, at the same time, a pleasant voice sounded. Don't move. Let me tell you, this dagger has been infected with a strong poison. If you're cut by it, I guarantee that you'll lose your life in an instant. If you want to live, you have to listen to everything I say. Strong poison? Hearing this, everyone in the courtyard could not help but panic. At this moment, everyone clearly saw that this was not a prearranged show. This madam really wanted to take Mediz's life. They didn't expect that the new concubine, who was supposed to be brought to the boudoir and waiting to enter the bridal chamber, would have such a fierce side. Everyone was shocked, and at the same time, they were even more curious about how General Mediz would deal with this situation. Strong poison? Maid Sai was surprised, but he wasn't as scared as everyone thought. Instead, he laughed. Beauty, don't joke with me. Do you really think I'll believe you just because you made up a random reason? Maid Sai was stunned for a moment, but he wasn't as scared as everyone thought he was. You don't believe me? Then try it if you can. Medina was very confident when she said these words, giving people a feeling that she was very sure of herself. After hearing this tone, everyone could not help but believe it. Only Mediz laughed and said, I don't believe you. Try it if you can. After saying that, he deliberately moved his neck forward and touched the tip of the dagger. The dagger was indeed sharp. With just a touch, it left a bloody mark on Mediz's neck. This shocked Medina, who was holding the dagger, and she could not help but let go of the dagger. She did not want to take Mediz's life. At least, she did not want to take his life before she completed the mission. A dead general was far less important than a living general who could listen to her orders. However, the plan could not keep up with the changes. Not only did Mediz not believe her, he even tried to test the dagger with his own body. At this moment, she was caught off guard. Everything did not go according to plan. She only felt that her mind was blank. In the eyes of everyone, Medina's performance was not a big deal. Instead, they were shocked by General Mediz's courage. Only Bai Shuang, who was in the crowd, had a bad feeling. This was not the time to be distracted. Just as Bai Shuang was about to warn Mediz, the moment Medina let her guard down, Mediz made his move. His right arm that was holding the wine suddenly loosened. When the bowl fell to the ground, his right hand freed up to grab the dagger. The tables had turned in an instant. Medina was stunned. But what she didn't expect was that as the porcelain cup fell to the ground, there was a crisp sound, and nearly 100 Turpan soldiers suddenly swarmed into the courtyard. As soon as they appeared, they surrounded Madenazer and her maidservants tightly. Mediz, who was already outside the circle, shouted loudly again, "Ha ha ha, you dare to use such a little trick against me? I'm afraid you don't know that I've already replaced the dagger in your hand. Ha ha ha, do you think I'm a 3-year-old kid who can be easily fooled by you? You said you were born in Hobak Seli. I've already sent people to investigate. There's no such thing. Tell me, why did you lie to me like this?" Mediz's words left Madenazer's mouth, and she was stunned again and again. Just a moment ago, she thought she was exposed. She thought he knew her identity. But now, it seemed that Mediz did not know. He only found the problem from her fabricated background. So, it did not affect the overall situation. Although the current situation was very unfavorable for her, Medina wasn't afraid. Even if she died, it wouldn't be considered as a failure of the mission. In that case, she would die a worthy death. Medina's expression gradually returned to normal when she realized that her actions had not spoiled the overall situation. Her voice rang out again, "Mediz, you're a scumbag. I'm only here to avenge my personal grudge. Now that you've seen through me, I'll let you do whatever you want to me." As she spoke, Medina purposely puffed out her chest, and at the same time, removed the veil covering her face. Madenazer was already very beautiful. Even a thin veil was unable to hide her beauty. Now that she was gone, her true appearance was completely exposed to everyone, causing waves of exclamations to erupt from the crowd. Following her action, a commotion broke out in the courtyard. Some of the maids who were pouring wine for the officials and nobles suddenly had short knives in their hands. Then, they slashed in all directions, causing chaos. It was obvious that this was Medina's backup plan. The signal to take action was to remove the veil. This scene also caused chaos. Even Bai Shuang, who was in the crowd, was targeted by a maid. However, he did not attack. Instead, he cleverly dodged and used this opportunity to move to the front of the main hall. "How dare you touch my guest? Take her down." Mediz's face turned ugly at this moment. He knew that this woman wouldn't have simply prepared a poison dagger. Now, it seemed like he was right. Fortunately, he was prepared. He called over 100 soldiers. When he shouted, the soldiers surrounded the maids in the courtyard. Chapter 12:12. There were less than 10 maids in total, and they were all intelligence agents of the CIA. Some of them were only on the periphery, and their training was limited. The only reason they could create chaos earlier was because of the daggers in their hands. Now that they were facing the Turkmen soldiers armed with spears and swords, they had no advantage at all. They were about to be surrounded. Taking advantage of the chaos, Bai Shuang easily made his way to the front of the hall. He estimated the distance with his eyes, then whistled loudly. With a leap, he landed beside Madenazer. Suddenly, a shadow appeared and landed beside her. Madenazer instinctively wanted to retreat, but at the same time, she heard a soft voice. "Don't panic. I am Bai Shuang, the commander of the 4th Regiment of the 5th Star Army's 1st Cavalry Division. If you want to live, follow me closely." Before he could finish his sentence, Bai Shuang's right hand reached for his waist, and a flexible sword appeared in his hand. He thrust it at Madenazer, who was 2 meters away from him. Although they were both assassins, Madenazer and Bai Shuang were not on the same level. The difference between them could be described as heaven and earth. With just one stab, Madenazer's right arm was injured, and he couldn't help but cry out in pain. Madenazer was a weak woman, and Madenazer was nothing to him. Therefore, he thought he was the safest. He didn't expect Bai Shuang to appear out of nowhere and use such a sharp sword technique. His right arm was injured because of a moment of carelessness. Out of instinct, the injured Madenazer retreated while shouting at the Turkmen soldiers around him, "Men, take them down. Take them down." Bai Shuang appeared too quickly, and the speed of his sword was too fast, so the soldiers didn't react in time. Now that the general's voice was heard, the ordinary soldiers immediately responded and rushed towards Bai Shuang. In a short period of time, no less than 30 soldiers had come here. This was all thanks to the 4 elite soldiers who had appeared after hearing the whistle. They had shared some of the firepower. Otherwise, there would have been even more people coming to surround and capture them. Bai Shuang's expression turned serious. He turned to Madenazer and asked, "How is it? Are you scared?" "No." Although Madenazer's body was trembling, she still answered bravely. "Then, since you're not afraid, let's start a massacre here today." "Ha ha ha." Bai Shuang laughed as she reached her left hand into her pocket. She took out a Type 54 pistol and 2 magazines and handed them to Madenazer. "Do you know how to use this?" "This is a pistol. I've learned how to use it before, but I'm afraid I can't shoot accurately." Madenazer's eyes lit up when she saw the object handed to her. "It's fine. They're so close. Even if we can't beat them to death, we'll scare them to death. All right, I'm going to make my move. Remember to follow me closely." After Bai Shuang finished speaking in a short amount of time, the soft sword in his right hand shook. It turned into a long dragon and suddenly thrust forward. Fighting 1 against 30 was already a test for White Shuang, not to mention that there was a weak woman behind him that needed to be protected. But even so, he would not back down. This was his duty as a professional soldier, and more importantly, as a man. With a roar, Bai Shuang stepped forward and stabbed out with his sword, striking the chest of a Turfan soldier. The sword was pulled out, and blood spurted out. The soldier on the other side fell to the ground. 1. Bai Shuang's lips moved slightly as he spoke softly. Madenazer, who was behind him, heard everything. She was shocked and blushed. Bai Shuang's entire body was emitting a masculine scent. She, who was very close to him, felt the same way. Swoosh. Bai Shuang thrust out his sword again, then pulled it back. 2. Bang. After a deafening gunshot, Madenazer's voice rang out. 3. Huh, well done. Bai Shuang praised from the bottom of his heart. Then, his long sword danced like a snake, forming an impenetrable net to kill the enemy and protect himself at the same time. Bai Shuang's sudden appearance made the already chaotic situation even more chaotic. Many of the officials and nobles who came to celebrate saw the bloody scene. They screamed and ran out of the courtyard. But they quickly retreated, not for any other reason, but because there were countless black-clothed soldiers rushing in from the outside. As these people rushed in, firecrackers were set off outside the general's mansion. This was Wu Tsong's masterpiece. They wanted to use the sound of firecrackers to cover up the sounds of killing in the general's mansion. The 290 elite soldiers of the 5-star army who stayed outside finally arrived. As soon as they appeared, their swords danced, and those who stood in their way were either dead or injured. "Stop them! Stop them!" Madenazer, who had been stabbed in the right arm, thought he had the situation under control. He did not expect the enemy to have more people than him. At this moment, his expression became very ugly. He regretted it. If he knew this would happen, he would have taken down Madenazer earlier. Why did he have to put on this show? Fortunately, he was afraid that Madenazer would find out, so he only mobilized 100 soldiers this time. Now, it seemed that he had miscalculated. But there was still a chance. For example, he could capture Bai Shuang or Madenazer and use them to threaten them. There was still a chance to turn the situation around. Immediately, he shouted at the soldiers guarding beside him, "Quick, charge! Take down this adulterous couple! Take them down!" With this shout, the pressure Bai Shuang faced increased. The number of enemies in front of him increased from a few to more than 10. When these people attacked together, Bai Shuang's left arm was immediately injured. If Madenazer did not fire 2 shots at the critical moment and intimidate some people, Bai Shuang would have been seriously injured. His left arm was still bleeding, but Bai Shuang did not seem to hear it. The soft sword in his hand was still moving back and forth. But after all, it was difficult for 2 fists to fight against 4 palms. The speed of his sword was obviously slower. Quick, he can't take it anymore. Attack together, attack. Seeing that the turning point was right in front of him, Madenazer shouted and raised his sword at the same time. However, he was smart enough not to attack Bai Shuang. His right arm was already injured, and he did not want to repeat the same mistake. This time, he chose to attack Madenazer, who was relatively weak. At this time, Madenazer had already used up all the bullets in her gun. There were more than 20 bullets, but she only killed 3 enemies and injured 4. The rest of the bullets were nowhere to be seen. At this moment, she was anxious because she was holding a gun that had no bullets. At this moment, a long sword was thrust at her face. Madenazer was obviously very angry at this moment. He wanted to destroy this woman's face. The long sword suddenly came at Madenazer while she was at a loss. At this moment, when she saw the sword enlarging in her eyes, she instinctively closed her eyes and waited for her death. Get out of the way. At the critical moment, Bai Shuang noticed the commotion behind him. With a loud shout, he leaped backward. The sword slashed Bai Shuang's back, leaving a palm-sized wound. Ah! The pain on his back caused Bai Shuang to let out a muffled groan. All of this fell into Madenazer's eyes as she was pinned under him. At this moment, the two's posture was somewhat ambiguous. Their breaths were so close that they could easily feel each other's breath. This made Madenazer's face blush. But when she thought of the current situation, she asked with concern, "Are you okay?" "I'm not dead yet." Bai Shuang endured the pain and replied. Then, he grabbed Madenazer and flipped her one by one. After he did that, he dodged the sword in Madenazer's hand. Madenazer's face was filled with anger after he failed to subdue the 2 of them. He roared and charged at Bai Shuang again with his sword. But as soon as he stepped forward, a soft sword flew at him, forcing him to take 3 steps back to avoid the attack. The soft sword was thrown by Bai Shuang. At this moment, he had no weapon in his hand. After a bitter smile, he hugged Madenazer and said, "Fine, I'll die. I won't be lonely if I can die with a beauty in my arms." "Is that so? Am I a beauty?" Madenazer blushed when she heard Bai Shuang's words. Ah, this. Bai Shuang was just expressing his feelings. When he thought of Madenazer's identity as the widow of a 5-star army officer, he immediately shut his mouth. He would never do something like blasphemy. Seeing that Bai Shuang didn't answer, Madenazer pouted. She then whispered, "To be able to die together with the general, this little girl is content." The voice wasn't very clear, but since they were so close, Bai Shuang still heard it clearly. His face immediately turned red. Madenazer saw this scene and couldn't help but laugh. Whoosh whoosh whoosh, a few arrows were fired. The elite soldiers of the 5-star army finally rushed into the courtyard and attacked Madenazer, who was standing in front of the hall. Dozens of soldiers died one after another. Even Madenazer himself was hit by 2 arrows. After he fell to the ground, the situation was settled. The inside and outside of the general's mansion were under the control of the 5-star army. They had taken a risk, but they had actually succeeded. Aside from luck, the most important reason for their success was Madenazer's plan. Her idea was simple. First, she would control Madenazer, then use his mouth to control the upper echelons of the city. Then, she would create chaos from the bottom to prepare for the arrival of the 5-star army. Her plan was generally feasible, but it wasn't perfect. Bai Shuang's arrival helped her perfect everything, making what happened next seem like a miracle. You're tuning in to the Carefree Valley YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.